Chapter 949. Human. Zaxi was stunned. Although he had fantasized that there might be humans living in the isolated land, but he didn't expect to meet them here. Moreover, it was so sudden that he wasn't prepared for it. Dean came back to his senses. His eyes flashed as he immediately saw the girl's heat source. She was only at pioneer level, but there wasn't the slightest murderous aura around her. It was as if she was just a little girl from an ordinary family. Whoosh! Jason's figure flashed and blocked the girl's retreat. Who are you? Why are you here? The girl didn't seem to feel his killing intent. She looked at him in surprise. Who are you? Why are you here? Are you from the Empire? Jason frowned as he noticed her language. Empire? The girl was surprised for a moment. She raised her finger and pointed in the direction of Dean and others. Do you mean the Shinluo Empire on the other side of the wall? Shinluo Empire? Dean's heart was moved. Was this the name of the kingdom of God? Jason stared at her. That's right. Are you from there too? The girl seemed to ignore his question. How did you come here? Are you the vanguard sent by the Shinluo Empire? You haven't answered my question yet, Jason said in a cold voice. Zaxi chuckled as he saw Jason's expression. Jason, don't be so nervous. Don't scare the little girl. Jason's face didn't change. You'd better not be careless. Don't forget where you are. Do you really think that ordinary people can survive here? Zaxi regained his gentle demeanor and smiled. Nothing is impossible. She shouldn't be living here alone, right? He then asked the girl. The young girl giggled and said, Yes, I live here with my father. Many years ago, when I was still very young, my father brought me here from the Shinluo Empire and we lived here. With your father? Many years ago, Jason frowned. So, there are only you and your father here? How did you come here? Why are you living here? The girl was slightly dissatisfied with his questioning attitude. She frowned slightly, but still answered, You'll have to ask my father about this. By the way, my father is very powerful. As long as he doesn't provoke those pyro people, none of the monsters here can hurt him. Jason snorted coldly and thought to himself, I don't need you to tell me that your father's strength must be extraordinary to be able to live here for so many years. Fire dragon people, are you referring to the fire dragon race? Zaxi immediately asked, Do you know where they live? You want to find them? The girl looked at him strangely and said, Let me give you a piece of advice. Don't go south. That's where they gather. If you meet them, only death awaits you. Even my father doesn't dare to go there easily. Jason stared at her. You better answer my question. Why are you living here? Since your father is so strong, why did he leave the Shinluo Empire and come here? If you don't tell me, then I don't mind using force. Although I know that your strength may not be inferior to ours, but the three of us together can keep you. Hey, Zaxi said, don't be so excessive. Then, he looked at Dean, hoping that he could persuade him. Dean was silent. He also felt that there was a problem with the girl. Jason's words reminded him that there was a great possibility that the girl was hiding the intensity of the heat source. Perhaps it was the middle or upper abyss. The three of them together may not be her opponent. This point could be seen from her fearless attitude after coming here. To say that she was innocent and didn't understand fear, Dean would never believe it. How can you be so fierce? The girl frowned as she heard Jason's words, but she saw Jason's cold face. She knew that he would do what he said. She pouted and said in an aggrieved tone, Dad said that there are no good people in the Shinluo Empire. That's why we escaped outside the wall. We thought that we would meet new humans here, but the dragons here are not easy to deal with, so we can only live here. Jason coldly said, If you don't tell the truth, then don't blame me for forcing you. I'm telling the truth. The girl bit her lips. Dad is right. You people from the Shinluo Empire are not good people. If you dare to bully me, then my dad won't let you go. This is the territory of my family. He knows that I came out to play. If I don't go back on time, then he will come out to find me. He will definitely find you. This place is very big. We could go far away. You don't have to scare me. Jason coldly said. You. The girl looked at him angrily. Zash saw that the atmosphere was a bit stiff and quickly said, Jason, don't be so fierce. Didn't she say that her father is here? Why don't we go and see her father? They have lived here for so long. Maybe they can show us the way. If you offend her, then even if we can escape, we won't be able to wander outside the borders for the rest of our lives." Jason frowned and looked at Dean. Dean was silent. In fact, he was thinking about this point. If he directly captured the girl, then the relationship between them would be completely stiff and the hope they had finally seen would be extinguished. But if they followed the girl to meet her father, and her father's strength was stronger than the three of them combined, then they would be at a disadvantage. Moreover, they weren't sure whether the father she mentioned was real or not. In case they went back with her and waited for the strong people of the entire clan. "Dean, you decide." Zaxi handed over the decision to Dean. The girl realized that Dean, who had been silent all this time, was the leader of the three. She curiously looked at Dean and then glanced at Aisha, who was next to Dean. A trace of imperceptible color flashed in the depths of her eyes. "My companion has offended you. I hope you can forgive her." Dean pondered for a moment and slowly said, "I have a few questions to ask you. I hope you can tell us the truth." The girl saw that Dean's attitude was calm, so she restored her relaxed and lively attitude. She nodded. "You can ask. I will tell you the truth, as long as you don't hurt me. What is your real strength?" Dean stared at her. The girl slightly pouted. She didn't expect Dean to ask a sharper question than Jason. But she had already promised, so she reluctantly said, "I don't know. I just heard from my father that I should be regarded as the Abyss of the Shinluo Empire." Abyss? Zash and Jason's pupils shrank. Although they had expected it, they didn't expect that the petite and lively girl would be as strong as them. Dean's eyes narrowed. "The Abyss is divided into several levels." "Which level are you?" "Several levels?" The girl was surprised. "Really?" Dean stared at her for a moment. He couldn't tell whether she really didn't know or she was deliberately lying. His heart was not sure, so he simply skipped it. If he continued to ask, it would become a forced confession. Although what he was doing now was a forced confession, at least he could save face. So he asked again, "What level is your father?" The girl shook her head. "I don't know either. In any case, my father is stronger than me. He can kill many monsters that I can't defeat. If it's as you said, that the Abyss is divided into several levels, then maybe my father is the strongest level." Dean was silent. When the girl said that she was an Abyss, he knew that her father was most likely an upper Abyss, or even an Abyss master. So the girl shouldn't be lying. Zaxi and Jason looked at each other with complicated expressions. The girl was already an Abyss, and the very powerful father she mentioned was naturally an even more powerful Abyss. Fortunately, they did not force her. Otherwise, if they really caught the girl, they would not be able to stay here anymore and would have to change places. After a brief silence, Dean asked a few more questions. "What's your name?" "My name is Dana. Dad said that I'm a flower that will never wither." "What do you do for a living?" "Hunting monsters. There are also some plants that we can eat." "What do you rely on to improve your strength?" "Dad said that the insects in a monster's body are called soulworms." "Are you the same?" Dean didn't answer but stared at her. "Have you eaten human flesh?" Dana was stunned. She shook her head and said, "How is that possible? There are monsters everywhere here. We can't eat the flesh of those corpse-like humans. Dad said that there's a virus in their flesh." Dean nodded slightly. His expression softened. "Is your home far from here? We want to visit your father." Dana smiled. "It's not far. I can lead the way. Dad hasn't met people from the Shinluo Empire for a long time. He will be very happy to see you." "I hope so." Dean smiled as he picked up the luggage and backpack from the ground. He looked at Jason and Zash. "You should also pack up and get ready to go." Jason and Zash were stunned. They didn't expect Dean to make a decision so quickly. Jason wanted to say something, but didn't. He knew that Zash was biased, so it was useless to say anything. "Are we going now?" Zash was stunned as he saw Dean ready to go. "Shouldn't we pack up the things here? It won't be too late to pack up when we come back," Dean said as he picked up the luggage and walked towards Dana. Zash was speechless. He wanted to say that it wasn't easy for the underground furnace to reach this temperature. But he saw that Dean was already in front of Dana. He knew that it was useless to say anything. He picked up his luggage and backpack. He was about to catch up with Dean's footsteps when he saw a cold light flashed. Dean was smiling as he walked towards Dana. He swung his sword and cut off Dana's body. She was cut from the waist. The beautiful girl fell to the ground. There was a look of astonishment and disbelief on her face. Go. Dean had already thrown off his luggage and entered the Reaper's body. His body was covered with sharp blades. Whoosh! Dana, whose body had been split into two on the ground, slapped out with her palm and slid forward. Puff! Puff! The lower half of her body that was left on the ground was pierced by a sharp blade and instantly shattered into palm-sized chunks of flesh. The sudden change made Zaxi Tay and Jason unable to react, but Jason's reaction was still faster than Zaxi T's. He was overjoyed and immediately entered his demon body to rush forward. His body was like a gecko crawling quickly on the ground, and sharp thorns erected all over his body. Dinah, who could not dodge in time, was immediately pierced in the abdomen by his sharp claws. She fell to the ground and screamed in pain. Dean quickly stepped forward. The black mucus on his demonized arm retreated like a tide, revealing his robust arm. He punched Dana's temple. Dana's scream came to an abrupt end as she fainted. Go, Dean said to Jason. He picked up the luggage and ran along the plane with Lisa. Without any explanation, Jason picked up Dana's upper body and followed closely behind, crawling quickly on his hands and feet. Zaxit finally reacted. He was stunned for a while, then he immediately picked up his luggage and followed. After 4 or 5 hours, they were 200 or 300 kilometers away from the iron smelting plane. They met a lot of monsters along the way, but most of them were at the Pioneer level. They only met 2 Abyss-level monsters, which were quickly killed by the 3 of them. The 3 stopped on a peak that looked like an extinct volcano. Dean threw the luggage to the side and sat down to rest. Zaxi and Jason gasped for breath. Now that they could rest, Zaxi immediately shouted, "Why did you kill her? Did she say something wrong?" Jason sat opposite to Dean. Although he knew that Dean would not hurt him, Dean's sneak attack on Dana still left a shadow in his heart. At this moment, he looked at Dean in puzzlement, waiting for his explanation. She lied, Dean said after his breath gradually calmed down. She said that her home is not far from here. If that's the case, they should have noticed us since we have been here for 7 or 8 days. Zash was stunned. Is that the reason? Dean shook his head and turned to stare at him. The power in her body is very strange. It's not because of magic marks. She suddenly appeared here. I think she should have known about our existence and deliberately came over. This is all your speculation. Zash couldn't help but angrily say. Jason quietly looked at Dean. You should know something else, right? Dean looked at him, slightly silent. What else? Zaxi looked at Dean anxiously. Dean's eyes fell on Dana's body on the ground. Take off her clothes and wake her up. You. Zash stared at him. Chapter 950. I believe that if you didn't read 10 lines at a glance, you would be able to see that the book was not advocating despicable behavior. On the contrary, it was full of mockery. Whether it was the previous events or the actions of the main character, they were all like this. The main character was not a hero, so the main character had no relatives, and his only true love had become a walking corpse. This was the current fate of the main character. I want to say, this book had never intended to appeal to the general public. A long time ago, it was stated that minors should not read it, and those who could not continue reading it should not read it. I only wanted to write what I wanted to express. If you can understand it, then so be it. If not, then leave. I also never thought about making a lot of money. It was enough to satisfy myself with eating and drinking. If I wanted to make money, I would have written a fantasy long ago. Here, I repeat, if you only see darkness and mistakenly think that this book advocates for such things, then leave as soon as possible. Back when the book had just surpassed 1 million words, I had already prepared myself for the book to be sealed at any time. But I would still continue writing what I wanted to write. Including the reviews, I rarely read them. Occasionally, I would glance at them. I didn't want to be disturbed by any external factors. When I finished writing the second half of the year, this book would be over. Since it was sealed early, I would start a new book early. That was all. Chapter 951. Pain, abuse, cutting flesh, crawling insects. Jason's torture methods were very professional. He tried all kinds of torture methods. He knew that pain alone wouldn't make Dana surrender. So he chose to use various methods to find Dana's weaknesses, the things she feared. Dana didn't fail to live up to her identity as an Abyss level. Her willpower was exceptionally strong. Not only did she not confess, she didn't even beg for mercy. But Jason's methods were not limited to these. He killed Dana's sleep and weakened her willpower. The torture didn't last overnight. Dean moved his position after a day on the peak of the extinct volcano. He didn't want his whereabouts to be leaked. Dana was tortured all the time. She couldn't sleep at the same time. She was seriously injured. She was exhausted due to continuous insomnia. She looked weak and haggard. It seemed that she would die at any time. When the 5th day passed, Zaxi couldn't wait any longer. He came up with some ideas, hoping to open Dana's mouth faster. Although he didn't approve of Dean's attack on Dana. But now he hoped to get some useful information from Dana's mouth. Half a month passed in the blink of an eye. Dinah, who hadn't slept for half a month and was constantly subjected to the resplendent light, was already on the verge of collapse. During this period of time, she had suffered all kinds of torment that ordinary people couldn't even imagine. Poisonous insects crawled all over her body. Needles were used to pierce her eyeballs and carve words on them. Flames were used to burn her wounds, and all sorts of obscene and filthy things happened between her and her father. If it was anyone else who had suffered so much, they would have long since collapsed and lost their sanity. Dean admitted that he couldn't bear so much pain and torture. He felt that he was far less than Jason and Zaxi in terms of abusing people. Most of the torture he had seen and heard happened in the Thorn prison, but it was only a small prison in Sylvia. Although it was dark and hopeless, the prisoners were all physically tortured. Dana, on the other hand, suffered both physical and mental blows, especially when Zaxi deliberately slandered her and told her many unbearable things about her father. She was in great pain. After the extreme coercion, Jason and Zaxit resorted to seducing Dana, slowly asking her questions. When she was obedient, they would appropriately lighten the punishment and devastation. Tell me honestly, who else is here beside your father? On the hillside, Jason looked at Dana, who was dirty and had messy hair, and asked coldly. At the same time, he was holding 2 venomous snakes with bright patterns in his hands. The venomous snakes struggled to wrap around his arm, but they couldn't bite down. They kept wriggling, which was disgusting. Dana managed to keep her eyelids open and said weakly, only my father." Jason coldly snorted and hung 2 poisonous snakes around her neck. When he loosened his grip, the poisonous snake immediately climbed on her chest, and the other wrapped around her neck, strangling her as if it wanted to take revenge on this human. However, the 2 snakes were only low-level magical beasts. Although their venom was strong, it was almost useless in front of their poison resistance. The strength of the snakes was also very weak to Dana, but the writhing snakes were enough to make her feel disgusted. However, she was already used to this kind of thing and didn't have much of a reaction. What she wanted to do most right now was to close her eyes and sleep. However, every time she closed her eyes for more than 3 seconds, a sharp pain would pierce her body, forcing her to open her eyes. "What's your purpose in approaching us?" Jason said coldly. After half a month of interrogation, he had basically confirmed that the father that Dana mentioned really existed. Otherwise, when Zaxi made up the story of her and her father being in a mess, she wouldn't have reacted so fiercely. It was as if the most precious place of a virgin had been violated. Dana gasped and couldn't speak. Jason undid his pants and revealed his lower body. He pointed it at her. "If you don't speak, I'll wash your face." What was the most painful? Humiliation. Jason had humiliated her in every possible way, from her body to her soul. He had trampled on her dignity, made it worthless, slandered the things she cherished, and played with her body, which had never been touched by the opposite sex other than her father. Dana was already numb to it. She even felt that death was heaven, but with Zaxi and Jason taking turns to look after her, she couldn't commit suicide. At the moment, Jason's body was exposed in front of her. If it was in the past, she would have already blushed. But at this moment, there was only humiliation, pain, and slightly powerless anger. In the silence, the warm liquid drenched her body, and the pungent smell almost made her faint. Her body trembled slightly, and when the liquid was all over, she gritted her teeth and said, "What did I do wrong?" Jason frowned but didn't answer her. No one could answer this question. Compared to the torture she had suffered, no matter what she had done wrong, she shouldn't have to endure such a painful life. But life wasn't mathematics. 1 + 1 = 2. When the result comes out, the process is the truth. Even if you can't accept the truth. Zaxite and Dean were sitting and resting. They looked at Jason's actions. Although they felt that it was a bit excessive, they tacitly didn't speak to stop him. Dean suddenly discovered that when you want to do a bad thing, you'll become a devil. In the blink of an eye, 3 days passed. Dana finally collapsed. Tears fell like rain as she answered all the questions that Jason had asked. However, the answer she gave made Dean and the other two frown, because her answer was exactly the same as the first time. She had come out to wander and met Dean and others. She lived with her father in the underground base that was 100 miles away from the plane. Her father was much stronger than her. She didn't know the specific level, but she said that her father was a very smart person. There were many machines in their residence that were made by her father. She and her father had lived here for many years. She wanted to go back to the war wall, but her father stopped her every time she mentioned it. She had seen the fire dragons, but didn't have any dealings with them. She only knew that the fire dragon's camp was in the south. The double magic marks in her body were implanted by her father using the machinery that her father had made. She didn't say that her father's magic marks were his. She stubbornly resisted Jason and Zaxite's repeated torture until her spirit collapsed. She became a madman who could only giggle. Jason and Zaxite thought that she was pretending to be stupid and told a lot of dirty and despicable things. However, she still giggled as if she was listening to a book from heaven. Your father is a despicable villain, dirty and shameless. If so, then smile for me. Ha ha ha. Come on, open your mouth and hold this. Ha ha. Apart from screaming in pain, Dana only knew how to giggle. Even when Jason rubbed his penis on her face, she still giggled foolishly. Dean couldn't stand it anymore. Jason and Zaxy's interrogation methods were more despicable than he had imagined. But he didn't stop them, as it would be futile to say anything. His heart was soon replaced by a new idea. He thought that if Dana was crazy, would she speak the truth? How could he make her speak? Dean told his thoughts to Jason and Zaxite. Their eyes lit up as they felt that the crazy Dana might be easier to interrogate than before. So they tried various methods. From torture to candy temptation, it proved that the effect of pain on a crazy person was far less than candy temptation. Pain was meaningless when it didn't bring fear. Dana slowly learned to nod under the comfort and temptation of the two. She slowly learned to communicate from a fool. However, after a few days, when Jason asked all the questions again, the answers he got were still the same as before. Jason, Zaxite, and Dean couldn't accept the result. They had to admit one thing. Maybe they were really wrong. Dana didn't intend to deceive them from beginning to end. It was all because of their suspicion. Realizing this point, the three immediately realized their despicable behavior. They suddenly felt that they despised themselves. However, this feeling was only temporary and soon faded away. People were always quick to forgive themselves. What should we do now? Jason asked Dean. Zaxite looked at Dean. There was dissatisfaction in his eyes. I have already said that your guess is just a guess. Why can't you think about the good side of things? Why do you think of others so sinister? Dean looked at him, but didn't say anything. He took Zaxite's criticism as a lesson for his wrong decision. He thought for a moment. In any case, at least we got the address of her father. Although I don't know what her father's magic marks are, but I think he is most likely the same as her. It is very likely that he has double magic marks and has the ability of 2 soul worms. Zaxite snorted coldly. So what if we know this? If we followed her back, we might have already gotten a clue from her father about how to sneak back to the God of War wall and return to the God of War wall. We wouldn't have to live in fear in this godforsaken place. At this point, he couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of saliva and cursed in his heart. Jason saw that there was a smell of gunpowder between them. It is useless to talk about it now. Let's think about what to do next. In my opinion, her father should have searched everywhere since she has been missing for so long. It won't be difficult for him to find the plane where we smelt steel. He will be able to recognize us by collecting our smell. So even if we disguise ourselves as passers-by, it will be useless. We can only follow Dean's words and take down her father. Do you still listen to him? Zaxite raised his eyebrows. Jason glanced at him. Now that things have come to this, if we fight amongst ourselves, our chances of survival will be even slimmer. Zaxite's eyes were gloomy. He wanted to say something, but in the end he suppressed his anger. He knew that it was not good for him to fight with Dean at this time. Whether Jason was on his side or not, Dean's strength was enough to defeat both of them. The enemy is in the light while we are in the dark. Since we know the address of her father, we should prepare a sneak attack. Dean calmly said. Jason frowned. Do you have a plan? It is too difficult. Moreover, her father has double magic marks. It is difficult, but there is still hope. Dean said. Zaxite coldly snorted. Even if you are middle abyss, but both of us are lower abyss. Can the three of us fight against the Lord of the Abyss? Even if her father is an upper abyss, he is enough to kill us easily. Not to mention a more powerful existence. We are indeed at a disadvantage, but we also have advantages. Dean ignored his tone and calmly said, Don't forget that we have the chips in our hands. Moreover, we have two key advantages. What chips and advantages do we have? Zaxite asked. Dean raised his hand and pointed at Dana, who was on the ground. That is our chips. As for the advantages, I said that the enemy is in the light while we are in the dark. That is the first advantage. The second advantage is that Jason said that her father might have collected our scent and followed it. This is one of our advantages. We can use our scent to lure him into the trap. Jason and Zaxite were startled. Zaxite put away the dissatisfaction in his eyes as he seriously looked at Dean. I didn't expect that it would be an advantage in your eyes. Jason opened his mouth and sighed softly. I was worried that our scent would be exposed and make things even more difficult. According to what you said, it is indeed a great weapon. Yes. Zaxite nodded. Although he was still unwilling to admit that Dean made a mistake and missed the opportunity to return to the wall, he had to admit that Dean was right. Why do you say that she is the chips? Jason asked. Are we going to use her to hold her father? Of course, it's not something as stupid as taking hostages. Dean shook his head. We can use her hand to hurt her father. No matter what, her father won't guard against his daughter. Both of them were startled. They looked at Dean. There was a trace of fear in their eyes. The youth who looked much younger than them was not only ruthless, but also insidious. Fortunately, he wasn't their enemy. How can we make her attack her father? Zaxite thought. Is it training? Dean shook his head and interrupted. Let's talk about this later. We have been here for a long time. Let's move to another place. We will take our time. Both of them didn't ask any more questions. They packed their luggage and set off. Chapter 952. Zash and Jason didn't expect Dean to be so vigilant. They felt that it was unnecessary. However, considering the 1% possibility that Dana was pretending to be stupid, they agreed with Dean's point of view. They only had one life. They didn't want to take risks if it wasn't necessary. In the next few days, Zash, Jason, and Dean used various methods to test Dana. For example, two of them would go out to hunt, while one of them would guard the place. The guard's attitude was relatively sloppy. He would either turn his back to Dana or be attracted by the sudden appearance of a small monster and inadvertently walk away. Dana seemed to be really stupid. She just lay on the ground and giggled. There was no action. Dean tried to deliberately dig a pit for Dana during training to test her reaction, but she still giggled. After a few days of trying, the three of them were finally convinced that Dana was really crazy. Her acting skills were so profound that there were no flaws. This is palm leaf juice. It can cover up the smell of our body. Zash brought back some thick leaves when he went out to hunt. He could gently rub them into dark green juice. We don't have time to react when we suddenly encounter her father. Although we have been constantly changing locations and covering up our scents these past few days, we will still leave behind some flaws. A senior once warned me that as long as we appear, we will definitely leave something behind. When we encounter someone with extremely strong perception, it will be a fatal flaw. Palm leaf juice. Jason was surprised as he saw the leaves in his hand. There are palm leaves here? Dean didn't say anything as he saw that both of them seemed to know about this thing. Zash and Jason rubbed the leaf juice all over their body. Then they smeared the rest on Dana's body. Naturally, they couldn't avoid physical contact during the process. Both of them had a tacit understanding with each other. Dana giggled and didn't resist. Even when they touched the sensitive parts of her chest, she let out a soft groan. It was very tempting. Unfortunately, the lower half of her body is gone. Jason felt slightly regretful. Zash smiled but didn't say anything. Although they weren't tempted by beauty, but after all they were men. Dean glanced at Zaxit. Zaxit was trying to stop Zaxit, but now he seemed to be enjoying it. It was like a person who had done a very bad thing. He didn't feel any shame when he did some petty things. After applying the palm juice, the three of them changed their location again. After half a month of exploration, the three of them discovered that as long as they stayed close to the War God Wall, they wouldn't encounter too powerful demonic beasts. If they went deeper, they would encounter more Dominator rank demonic beasts and overlords. They might even encounter Abyss beasts, as well as 2 or 3 Abyssal clan beast packs. In the blink of an eye, 5 days had passed. The three of them changed their positions many times, staying in each place for no more than a day. Along the way, they used all kinds of leaf juice, soil, and the hair of the monsters they peeled to change the smell. In addition, Jason also told Dean and Zashi about a secret recipe to eliminate the smell. It was to mix the blood of the monster with ashes. He also had a special bottle of ash powder that he brought with him. He mixed it with water and stirred it into a pulp. Then he smeared it all over the body to seal the pores and minimize the spread of the smell. "Come, tell me, kiss Daddy." "Pa, pa, pa." Dana giggled. Jason, who was training her, smiled. "How to kiss." He handed a blood-stained monster's leg to her. Dana giggled and bit down hard, tearing off a large piece of flesh. She giggled and said, "Kiss, kiss Daddy, good girl." Jason patted her head to show his appreciation. Dana's face was as happy as a cat's, and she enjoyed his touch very much. Jason pointed to a venomous python that had been hunted. "That's Dad." "Daddy, Daddy?" Dana's reaction was a bit slow. She turned her head and saw the dead poisonous python on the ground. A silly smile slowly appeared in her eyes. Her arms suddenly pushed off the ground, and she quickly leaped over, hugging the poisonous python. She opened her mouth and fiercely bit it, tearing off a piece of flesh. Her voice was muffled as she giggled foolishly. "Dear father, father, good girl." Jason smiled even more contentedly and stroked her head. Dana's face was filled with obedience as she leaned into his embrace. Zash and Dean were sitting on the stone next to Jason. Zash looked at Dean as he saw the excellent results of Jason's training. Will it really work? What if his father has a strong poison resistance? Then we can only blame our bad luck. Dean shook his head. His sneak attack was to hide the venom in Dana's 2 molars. When she bit, the venom would be injected into the body of the bitten target, just like a poison monster. Will your poison really work? Zaxi was still unsure. It can directly poison the abyss, so it should be a relatively poisonous venom. If we can find something more poisonous, then it can be used as a substitute. Dudian said. The poison in his body was a mixture of the venom of the ice dragon and other monsters. There was also the poison of the poisonous dart frog. This poison had made the ruler of Sylvia lose his ability to fight. Now the effect of the poison had soared. It wasn't difficult to poison the abyss, but the magic marks had a high resistance to the poison. Even the abyss was immune to the poison, so the effect would be greatly reduced. But there was also an advantage. Usually people with strong resistance would have defensive-type magic marks. It meant that their perception and attack ability were slightly inferior. They had been changing positions for so many days, but Dana's father hadn't caught up with them. It showed that her father's perception wasn't strong. If it was me with double magic marks, then I would choose perception and attack, or attack and defense. His father should be like this, Dean secretly thought. His eyes flashed as he glanced at Zashi, who was next to him. There was a glimmer of light in his eyes. 3 days later, the three of them were ready and officially set sail to return to the iron-making plane. After 2 days of travel, the three of them were getting closer and closer to the iron-making plane. There were no clouds in the sky, and the stars were shining brightly. The three of them gathered at the edge of the woods and ate the low-level monsters they had hunted. They sat on the branches and looked at the moon. There was no entertainment in a long night. They were in a daze and daydreaming. It was the only way to pass the time. The moonlight is so beautiful. I don't know if we can fly up, Jason said whimsically as he found a topic. Zaxi suddenly laughed. How can we fly up? Just the thunderbirds in the clouds are enough to kill us. There are no thunderbirds outside the borders. But I heard that the higher we fly, the colder it gets. In the end, we will be frozen into an ice sculpture. That's right. It's just like us. Jason sighed as he looked at the dark forest. We humans are probably the only beings in the world who know how to look up and appreciate the starry sky. Zash shrugged. Of course. What do these low-level monsters know? I heard that we humans used to spread all over the world. We were the masters of all creatures. Jason nodded. There was yearning and regret in his eyes. Dean listened to the chatter of the two. There was a bit of desire in his heart to talk under the moonlight, but he held back. After a long while, he slowly said, Perhaps it is because we know how to look up and appreciate that we want to conquer and destroy. Jason asked curiously, Conquer? Are you saying that someone wants to conquer the starry sky? Everything you see, you want to take it for yourself, unless it's garbage, isn't it? Dean asked back. That's right. Jason nodded. Especially beautiful women. Zash chuckled. Jason laughed heartily. Dean got up. I'm going to relieve myself. I'm going to look around to see if there are any monsters from the abyss. Should I accompany you? No. Don't go too far. Be careful. Signal if there is danger. Both of them exhorted. Dean jumped down from the treetops and took Aisha out of the woods. They went to the mountain next to them and peed. After walking for more than 10 miles, he handed the roasted monster's flesh to Aisha. He cut it with a splitter knife so that she could eat it slowly and gracefully. After she finished eating, he used a soft handkerchief to wipe her lips. As he was about to return, he saw a heat source approaching from the edge of his field of vision. Human? Dean's pupils shrank as he saw the outline of the heat source. It was an upright human figure. Although there was still some difference from the human body, it was like an oval red shadow. But he had used the heat source to identify human beings countless times, so he had rich experience. The hair all over his body stood on end. The first person he thought of was the father that Dana had mentioned. Did he catch up? Dean soon calmed down. He frowned as he felt that the person's reaction was a bit strange. It seemed that he wasn't Dana's father. If her father was tracking them, how could he walk slowly and swagger? He should have lurked in the dark or rushed at full speed. But the heat source was walking very slowly. It seemed that it was just a normal stroll. Sometimes it stopped and seemed to be identifying the direction. Dean's eyes flashed as he thought for a moment. Finally, he took Aisha and quietly touched the place. If it wasn't Dana's father, then who could it be? He was very curious. Was there someone else on this lonely land? Or a local resident? 10 minutes later, he and Aisha quietly approached the place. Dudian quietly peeked out from a crack in the boulder. He was shocked and widened his eyes. This person was Dana. She had the same style of linen, the same color of light blonde hair, and the same face. The only difference was that her body was intact. It was the same as the first time Dean saw Dana. Dean's heart twitched. Even though he had seen countless bloody scenes, he was lost for a moment. He felt that he had seen a ghost. Wasn't Dana with Zaxit and Jason? Wasn't her waist cut off by him? Wasn't she crazy because of their torture? Who? Dana, who was standing in front of Dean, suddenly turned back and looked directly at the place where Dean was hiding. Dean's face was ugly. His breath had fluctuated for a moment and exposed him. He didn't expect that he would make such a low-level mistake after experiencing so many dangerous battles. His mind was not calm enough. Perhaps he felt guilty and ashamed of torturing Dana. So he had such a big reaction? He didn't know why, but he knew that he had to come out. There was no point in hiding. When he came out from behind the boulder, Dean suddenly found that the Dana in front of him was a little different from the Dana he had met before. Their hairstyles were different. The previous Dana had a ponytail and looked very innocent and lively. But this Dana had loose hair that was scattered on her shoulders. She had the noble and elegant look of a princess. Her expression was more indifferent. Human. Dana's eyes flashed when she saw Dean. Then she noticed Aisha, who was next to Dean. Her eyes were full of surprise. "I'm just passing by. My name is Dean. Who are you?" Dean tentatively asked. He took the initiative to be friendly, but his heart was a little nervous. "My name is Dana," the girl said. Dean's pupils contracted for a moment, but soon returned to normal. His expression didn't change. He smiled as if he had heard the name for the first time. "It's a really good name." The girl looked at him. There was a trace of inexplicable meaning in her eyes. "You seem to have heard of this name? When I was a child, I had a friend with this name. It seems that there are a lot of people with this name." Dean chuckled. The girl stared at him. She saw Dean's natural smile. Finally, she slowly retracted her sharp eyes and asked, "Why are you here?" "Listening to your language. Are you from there?" She pointed to the war god's wall. Dean nodded. There was a trace of embarrassment on his face. "Not long ago, there was a war. I was separated from the main force and ended up here. I guess I'm a deserter now. I don't dare to go back." The girl asked, "Are you alone?" Dudian immediately shook his head. His head shook like a rattle. He looked very honest and reserved. "There were 8 people who were separated from me. They were resting on the other side. I came out to pee and patrol the surroundings. I didn't expect to meet you. Are you a resident here?" His eyes lit up and his face was full of excitement. The girl shook her head. "I'm the same as you. I came from the other side of the wall, but I've lived here for a long time." "A long time?" Dean was surprised. "Can you live here? Aren't there fire dragons hovering here? Haven't you seen them?" "We have a way to avoid them." The girl shook her head slightly. She didn't want to talk more about this. She looked at Dean. "Your teammates are over there. Why don't you take me to see them? I've been here since I was a child. I haven't seen what the people outside are like," she said with a curious look. Dean couldn't help but think of Dana, who he had met before. Her innocent smile and eyes showed that she wasn't on guard. "They are rude. If you don't mind, please come with me," Dean said seriously. He moved sideways to make an invitation. He waited for the girl to slowly approach. Her light footsteps stepped on the grass. It was as if she was stepping on his heart. When the girl came in front of him, Dean smiled and stepped forward to guide her. The girl followed closely behind. She looked around and asked, "Did you and your teammates see a girl who looks like me? She's also called Dana. She's my younger sister." Dean was surprised. "You have the same name as your sister?" The girl nodded and asked, "Have you seen her?" Dean shook his head. "No. If I had seen her, I would have invited her to come with us." "That's true?" Dean curiously asked. "How can you have the same name as your sister? Did she get separated from you?" "Yes. She went out to play half a month ago and never came back. My dad was worried to death. He has been looking for her everywhere. I also came out to look for her until now. It's late at night." The girl sighed. There was a bit of sadness between her eyebrows. Dean looked at her appearance. He couldn't bear to see her like this. But he still showed a regretful and sympathetic expression. She should be lost, or... When the word yes came out of his mouth, he suddenly waved the splitter in his hand without warning. With a clang, sparks flew everywhere. The sound of the collision was particularly loud in the night. Dean and Dana pulled away from each other. Both of them were shocked. Dean didn't expect that Dana, who had been listening to him indifferently, would react the moment he attacked. She would block his attack. The girl also didn't expect that Dean's attack would be so fierce. Although she was prepared, she almost couldn't resist. At the moment, the weapon in her hand was broken. Her arm was cut, and she was injured. "You were prepared?" Dean's face turned gloomy. He hoped that the previous sound would alarm Jason and Zaxi. but the distance was too far, so they wouldn't be able to hear it. "Where's my sister?" The girl looked at Dean coldly. "How do you know that I'm related to her?" Dean asked, "Although your performance was flawless, but there is one thing you may not know. Your backpack has already exposed you." The girl sneered. "Backpack?" Dean was startled. Suddenly a light flashed in his mind. "Do you mean the thing inside?" "Yes, the flesh of the origami." The girl said in a cold voice, "My dad detected the reaction of the flesh of the origami not long after you came to the plane. But he was in the middle of the experiment and couldn't get out. So he asked my sister to come and take you back. I didn't expect her to fall into your hands." Dean was startled. They were exposed as soon as they arrived at the plane? Did Dana know about them? How was it possible? He couldn't accept it. He didn't want to believe it. But he felt that there was no reason for Dana to deceive him. He gradually calmed down and slowly recalled the situation when he first met Dana. Now that he thought about it carefully, he suddenly realized that there were many details in Dana's performance. There were many flaws and doubtful points that were definitely not limited to the few he had observed earlier. For example, the surprise on Dana's face when she saw them was obviously more intentional. Now that they thought about it, it was even more obvious that she was acting. In addition, Dana didn't show any fear. Anyone who stayed in the habitat of the monsters would know to be careful. But Dana directly approached them. She didn't use stealth or camouflage. Even when she saw them, she didn't show any obvious fear. If it was an ordinary person who met a few of the same kind with unknown strength, it wouldn't just be a surprise. But because of Dana's naivety, they mistakenly thought that she was too innocent. She didn't know that people were sinister. That's why she believed them so easily. However, the other party's purpose was to take them back to her father's place. As for the purpose, it was likely to be the flesh of the origami in his backpack. They thought that others were naive. Maybe they were also naive in Dana's eyes. However, there was one thing he couldn't figure out. He asked, "Why didn't your father let both of you come together? With your strength, you should be able to directly capture us." The girl coldly snorted. "It doesn't matter if I tell you. My sister and I have very different living habits. She only comes out during the day and stays at home at night. I only come out at night and don't go out during the day. Moreover, my father has already detected that the three of you are just lower abyss monsters. With my sister's strength, it would be easy to subdue the three of you." Dean's face slightly changed. The two of them alternated day and night. What was the reason? He didn't believe that it was just living habits. It was likely because of their magic marks or other reasons. Some monsters like to hunt at night, while some like to hunt during the day. In addition, her words revealed a lot of information. First of all, her father could actually perceive that they were lower abyss monsters. It must be known that they all hid their heat source. But how far away was her father? At least out of their range of perception. It was incredible that her father could not only perceive them, but also know their specific strength from such a far distance. However, if her father's perception was outstanding, then why hadn't he caught up with them after so many days? Was he unable to get away? He felt that it should be impossible. After all, almost a month had passed. Could it be that her father had detected their strength with the help of some instrument? Dean noticed that she had said detected the reaction of the flesh and blood of the origami. Although the meaning of detection and perception was similar, Dean felt that they were two different things. In his opinion, perception only represented the ability of the body. Detection not only included the detection of instruments, but also the detection of the body. If it was an instrument, then it could explain why her father couldn't track them. However, this also extended to another piece of information. That was, her father had very sophisticated equipment, and the technology content was extremely high. As he was thinking about the pros and cons, he was suddenly shocked, and his face turned ugly. He glanced in the direction where he came from and saw Jason and Zaxi, as well as the crazy Dana. In the previous repeated interrogation, Jason naturally asked her whether she approached them with a purpose or whether it was an accident. But Dana's answer was no. From beginning to end, her answer didn't change. So much so that the interrogators believed that she had completely confessed. However, if it was an ordinary captive, there would always be some discrepancies in the answers. At the beginning, they wanted to hide things but gradually loosen their mouths. But Dana didn't change. This was a very suspicious point. But somehow they mistakenly thought that she was too simple and didn't lie from the beginning. She was an innocent and kind-hearted girl. Now it seemed that her confession couldn't be taken seriously. It was estimated that half of it was true and half of it was false. Moreover, she shouldn't be crazy. If a person was stupid, how could they make the same answer and reaction as before? The more Dean thought about it, the more scared he became. He suddenly felt that he had made a big mistake. The cause of this big mistake was that he underestimated Dana. It wasn't only him. Jason and Zaxi were also deceived by Dana. They had a preconceived idea that Dana might be an innocent girl. That was why they thought that the torture would make her crazy. But now it seemed that Dana approached them with the intention of bringing them back to her father. The reason why she didn't adopt a forceful and direct attack was very simple. If it was her, when she was confident that she could suppress the three of them, she would fearlessly choose to use a gentler method to lure them over. This way, it would save her energy. If they had refused Dana, then perhaps they would have faced her thunderous attack. Moreover, if he hadn't taken the initiative to attack, then perhaps Dana would have attacked first. Just like now, when he attacked, the girl was on guard and was able to parry in time. Moreover, she had seen through his identity. He suspected that she probably took into account that he defeated her sister. So she didn't attack from the front, but had the same plan as him. Otherwise, how could she be so defenseless when she came over? Didn't her performance make him relax his vigilance? There were countless cases of failure or death because of contempt. Dean also knew that he shouldn't despise anyone. Even a lion needs to use all its strength to catch a rabbit. But he still made this mistake, and it was a fatal one. No one could avoid committing a crime knowingly. Perhaps this was something that the most profound philosophy couldn't change. Fortunately, he met the girl. Otherwise, they would have taken Dana to attack her father. It was like sending sheep into a tiger's mouth. He was glad in his heart. He was even grateful to the girl in front of him. Your sister's perception should be quite good, right? Dean suddenly asked. The girl indifferently said, It seems that you have already experienced it. Dean slightly nodded and sighed in his heart. It was too dangerous. At the moment, the last doubt in his heart had been answered. Perhaps she had heard that they had tested whether Dana was crazy or not. Perhaps she had also sensed that they had pretended to leave, but hid in the dark to observe. Chapter 953. With my sister's strength, it's easy for her to deal with you lower abyssals. What despicable means did you use to make her fall in your hands? The girl said coldly. Dean indifferently said, Didn't you personally experience the despicable means used? So that's how it is. The girl thought of Dean's sneak attack, and the coldness in her eyes intensified. Since that's the case, get ready to be buried with her. After that, dark red mucus slowly emerged from her body, like extremely thick plasma, and slowly covered her snow-white arms, neck, and other positions. Dean saw that the appearance of the dark red mucus was very similar to the appearance when they entered the devil's body. However, he didn't see the girl use a hunter's tool. The mucus seemed to gush out from her pores. As the mucus covered her body, her limbs slowly changed and mutated. The petite, lowly body became more and more ferocious and strange. Her pale blonde wavy hair was also slowly covered by the mucus and became like a helmet. At the same time, the ends of her hair split into 6 or 7 strange sharp horns. Dean was convinced that the strange mucus was the same substance as the demon hunter, and it promoted her to enter the complete state of the demonic body. He didn't dare to be careless. The split blade in his hand melted and quickly covered his whole body. Sharp blades protruded out, revealing a ferocious posture like a tyrant. The sharp blades all over his body reflected cold light, as if they could cut off his sight. Both of them completed their demonic bodies almost at the same time. Dean looked at the girl. At this moment, she didn't have half a human appearance. Her body was towering, and the legs and hips of her lower body were lying on the ground like a scorpion, splitting into 7 or 8 sharp claws. The skin on the abdomen of her upper body was snow white, But this kind of white was not the delicate skin of a human. It was like a layer of fish scales or gelatinous skin, extremely smooth. On this extremely smooth skin, there was a faint face, and the outline was similar to the girl's. Her arms had also become monstrous arms that were more than a meter long. Her arms were covered in armor and spikes. The head on her neck had become extremely horrifying. Her face was completely distorted, and her eyes had expanded to the size of a baby's fist. Her pupils were blood red, as if they were about to drip blood. Sharp teeth of different lengths protruded from her mouth, making her look like a wild beast. In addition to the strange shape of the demonic body, Dean noticed that there was a faint layer of golden light around her body. He had seen this feeling before. It was the same as the layer of golden light that was brought by the power of origami on his blade. Could it be that her body also contained the power of the desolate god's flesh and blood? The girl was also sizing up Dean as Dean was looking at her. She felt a bit tricky when she saw that Dean's body was covered with sharp blades. It was like the status of hedgehogs and porcupines in the animal world. Even if they met a beast that could kill them, they would feel that it was difficult to kill them, and they would have to pay a big price. The two of them were sizing each other up, observing and weighing each other. At the same time, they were analyzing each other's weaknesses and strengths based on their appearances. The night suddenly became extremely quiet. Dean looked at the extremely faint outline of the girl's face that was exposed under the snow-white skin of her abdomen. His heart suddenly moved. He couldn't figure out whether the core of the girl was the ferocious head on her neck or the faint face on her abdomen. However, the face on her abdomen gave him inspiration. He immediately used the dragon blood technique to control the muscles in her abdomen and said with ventriloquism, "Do you have the flesh and blood of the desolate god in your body?" While he was talking, his mouth opened correspondingly, but he didn't make any sound. The girl didn't respond to him. After a short silence, her figure suddenly flashed, and she suddenly dashed toward him. Whoosh! The 8 monstrous claws on her lower body quickly crawled like a scorpion, but also like an extremely fast spider. They almost reached him in an instant. Dean was shocked. His body's hormones erupted in an instant. His feet crisscrossed on the ground and suddenly rotated. He swung the sharp blades like a hedgehog top. This was the strongest defensive move that he had come up with. Thorn shield. Clang! Clang! The girl swung her monstrous arm. As soon as she touched the periphery of the rotating sharp blades, there was a cutting sound. She immediately retracted her hand. Her monstrous arm's wrist was cut off, and blood kept flowing. She retreated dozens of meters and looked at Dean with a ferocious face. It seemed that she didn't expect that Dean's blades would be so sharp. She had always been very confident in her physical strength. Even if she was bitten by some abyssal monsters with amazing bite force, she would only feel a little pain but would not be injured. She didn't expect that in front of Dean, she would be directly cut off with just one touch. She suddenly somewhat understood why her sister would fall in the hands of this person. Perhaps the opponent's strength was not as good as hers, but with such a terrifying attack, only one blow would be enough to kill her. The anger in her heart gradually calmed down. At this time, Dean also stopped from rotating, but he didn't pounce on her. Obviously, he intended to stop her by remaining still. Her speed is even faster than that gorilla instructor. The opponent's magic mark has a greater increase in speed. Her demonic body has undergone such an exaggerated mutation. Obviously, the increase in physique is weaker, but she still has such speed. Is she an upper abyss? Dean's eyes flashed, and his face was dignified. He had killed a gorilla instructor, and he had a new definition of his strength, which was comparable to the middle abyss. But in front of him was an upper abyss, and there was a huge gap in strength. However, fortunately, his eyes could still capture the girl's movements, or he would really be dead. Puff! At this time, the girl suddenly waved another monstrous arm's sharp claws and slashed at the wound that was cut by Dean. The cut was 2 centimeters thick, and blood gushed out faster. But in less than 10 seconds, it immediately stopped, and the wound seemed to have signs of scarring. After dealing with the wound, the girl continued to look at Dean. Half a minute later, she suddenly rushed over again. The moment she approached Dean, her body suddenly swayed, and she appeared at the side. Like lightning, a phantom seemed to appear in the place where she was. Dean immediately used the thorn shield again to defend, and the rotating blade had 360 degrees without any dead angle. The girl was about to attack from the side, but when she saw that Dean had successfully released the thorn shield, she immediately jumped back. Her violent face became more and more ferocious. Suddenly, she opened her mouth, and her cheeks bulged like a toad. Her cheeks were bigger than her whole head, and then she suddenly spat out. A jet of black water, or rather, mucus, shot out. Dean, who was using the thorn shield to defend, didn't have time to release the thorn shield to dodge. When he saw the black mucus shooting at him, his face slightly changed, but he could only watch it rush over and hit him. Although the thorn shield was extremely strong in defense, its shortcomings were also very obvious. It was easy to get dizzy after a long time, and the physical consumption was fast, and the position couldn't be moved. Chapter 954. What's going on? Dean was shocked, but he did not dare to stop. At this time, the girl's bulging cheeks were getting smaller and smaller, and the black mucus in her mouth was slowly ejected out. Without waiting for Dean to relax, she took a deep breath, and her cheeks bulged again. Dean's face changed, and he quickly stopped his body. At the critical moment, he jumped away to avoid the black mucus spat out by the girl. At the same time, Dean also saw the situation of his body. The sharp blades were all stained with black mucus, and as he spun and swung, the mucus was like a very sticky glue, pulled out black silk, entangled layer by layer like a big net, and stuck his sharp blades together. Waving and stretching became extremely difficult. He had no time to think about what the black mucus was, and whether it was poisonous or not. He saw the girl had already rushed over, and in a flash, she was in front of him. Her fierce face was full of roar, and the sharp teeth in her mouth slightly protruded a few inches, becoming sharper and sharper, biting Dean's face. Dean was shocked and hurriedly raised the sharp blade to stab. Suddenly, the shadow flashed, and the sharp blade penetrated through the girl's body, but there was no blood, and the shadow dissipated. At the same time, a cold air suddenly attacked from aside. The girl's sharp claws were like sharp knives, stabbing straight at Dean's waist. This change was too fast, and Dean had no time to turn his body. Just when the girl thought that her attack was successful, she suddenly felt pain in her palm, and her face suddenly changed. The 8 strange claws under her abdomen crawled very fast, not only temporarily stopped, but also instantly pulled away. She looked at the sharp blade that pierced her palm, and the pain made her face ferocious. When she looked up again, she saw that Dean's body slowly mutated into a sharp blade. This incomparably sharp blade could actually be ejected. The girl gritted her teeth. She was obviously stronger than Dean, but she suffered 2 losses in a row. However, these 2 losses were not without gains. The first time, she knew that Dean's blade was sharp, and the second time, she knew that Dean's blade could be ejected. If he throws out all the sharp blades while spinning, he can probably kill a circle of the abyss. The girl looked at Dean calmly, secretly trying to figure out Dean's hidden abilities and combat skills. However, she thought that Dean did not shoot out a sharp blade when he was rotating. It should not be to hide this point, but to shoot out a single sharp blade when he was rotating, he could not control the accuracy and would cause harm to her. If all of them were shot out, then the gap would be fatal when Dean regenerated a new blade. Moreover, this move was extremely effective against group attacks, but it was a bit of a waste in a one-on-one battle. Dean looked at the girl, who was temporarily forced to retreat. His face was gloomy. In a head-on confrontation, his physique was completely crushed. Fortunately, the sharp blade was sharp enough. Even if the girl was much stronger than him, she could still seriously injure or even kill him. However, his speed couldn't touch the girl, so he could only rely on sneak attacks. However, the young girl was not a fool. She had more combat experience than him. If not for the fact that she did not know his strength and was ambushed, she would not have suffered so many losses. Now that she was on guard, it would be very difficult for him to hurt her again, and he could not do anything to her. Therefore, after 2 consecutive, seemingly advantageous situations, his mood became more and more depressed. Whoosh! Another sharp blade suddenly flew out. The girl's body swayed and easily avoided it. Although the speed of the ejection of the sharp blade was fast, it was still slower than the waving of the sharp blade. After all, the ejection of the sharp blade mainly relied on the compression of the muscles and the push of the bones. There were very few tissues that could transmit the force. Humph! With his strength, I overestimated you. The girl pulled out the sharp blade in her palm, but did not abandon it. She held the other end and held it as a sword. Dean saw that she wanted to use her own sharp blade to attack him. He could not help but feel funny and a little ironic. Fortunately, these sharp blades would gradually become weak and vulnerable after leaving his body. Whoosh! He shot out another sharp blade, and at the same time stimulated the bones to accelerate the growth of a new sharp blade. The girl easily avoided it again. After half a minute, Dean shot out another sharp blade and urged the growth of a new sharp blade. After several times, the girl immediately saw through Dean's idea. She frowned and did not give Dean a chance to replace the sharp blade. She quickly flew over. The moment she approached, she suddenly bounced forward. The 8 strange claws under her abdomen suddenly turned into countless afterimages, covering Dean's whole body. Dean had no time to use the thorn shield. Even if he used it, the initial speed was not fast enough, and he would be defeated. He could only wave the sharp blades on his body, like countless hair ribbons fluttering in the air. They shot forward, slanted, curved, or picked up, stabbing at the girl from different angles. This was completely a posture of mutual destruction. He could not avoid the girl's attack, and could only attack in place of defense. Puff! Puff! In the blink of an eye, the two had attacked each other hundreds of times. Then it was like a repulsive force broke out between the two, bouncing their bodies. Dean took a few steps back, and the sharp blade behind his tail pierced into the soil like a third leg support, stopping his body. He looked down at the 3 cup-sized blood holes in the gap of the sharp blade on his chest, and his eyes flickered slightly. On the other side, the girl's injury was much more serious than Dean's. 2.5 of the 8 strange claws on her lower body were cut off, and the remaining claws also had deep or shallow scratches, and the wounds were bleeding. The girl had seen the fierceness of Dean's sharp blade, and the wounds caused by it could not heal. She could only cut off the pierced and scratched wounds, cut off the nearby flesh, and create new wounds by herself. The wounds caused by her could be healed, and the capillaries and flesh tissue would not be completely destroyed. Whoosh! Whoosh! Dean ejected a sharp blade, and at the same time accelerated the growth of new sharp blades. In the blink of an eye, all the sharp blades were restored to new, and the sharp blades stained with black mucus were all ejected. The girl bandaged her wounds and looked at the recovered Dean. The ferocious look on her face did not diminish. The battle seemed to have returned to the starting point. Only the injuries on her body proved that the previous battle had happened. Your magic mark is very good, but it's a pity that its ability is too simple. The corner of the girl's mouth slightly tilted up, and her twisted face looked more ferocious. Since you forced me to this point, I won't let you die easily. After that, the sound of bones twisting came out from her body. Her body suddenly doubled in size, and sharp thorns grew on her back. Her upper body leaned forward, like a crawling lizard with 8 legs. God's thorn. Chapter 955. So fast, Dean's pupil shrank. He saw a black shadow in his line of sight. Before his body could react, the shadow had already arrived in front of him. At this moment, it was too late for him to use the thorn shield. He would be hit before he could even rotate. In a hurry, he instinctively raised all the sharp blades in front of him, either to parry or to stab. At this moment, the black shadow suddenly flashed like a ghost arc blade, and a chill instantly came from behind. Dean's omnidirectional vision clearly saw that the girl turned into a black shadow and went around to his back. His face instantly turned pale. It was unbelievable that she could still turn at such a fast speed. Was that not the limit of her speed? He saw the girl's movement, but at this moment, all his sharp blades rushed forward, and it was too late to defend. All of this happened in a total of less than half a second. The black shadow suddenly hit the root of the sharp blade on Dean's back. Although his whole body was covered with sharp blades, the gap between the blades was the weakness of his body. Bang! Dean's body leaned forward, and the severe pain made him feel like his whole back was torn, like a sharp cone piercing his whole spine. He groaned in pain. Before he landed, he saw the girl chasing after him like a shadow. From under her armpits, two snake-like tentacles suddenly shot out and wrapped around Dean's legs. In the demonized state, Dean's legs were also protruding with extremely sharp spikes, but the snake-like tentacles wrapped around the gap of the spikes and pulled Dean. The next moment, Dean felt pain in his feet, and his body rolled forward. Ignoring the severe pain, he quickly climbed up and used the sharp blades to protect his whole body. He found the girl's figure for the first time, but his face changed. He saw that the tentacles under her armpits were slightly bent, wrapping around a leg full of sharp blades. This leg was naturally his. He felt that one of his legs was cut off from the knee, and the blood kept flowing. The girl's face was full of violence, but there was a hint of playfulness in it. She looked at Dean ferociously, and the corners of her mouth seemed to pull out a smirk. She casually threw off the tentacles that were wrapped around her calf. In the process of throwing off the tentacles, several shadows flashed like lightning, and the calf instantly shattered into pieces of flesh and broken bones scattered on the ground. There was no possibility of reconnecting it. Dean stared at her, his eyes gloomy, but his forehead was overflowing with fine cold sweat. Injuries were common in battles, and broken limbs were also very common. In such a disadvantageous situation, it was already very lucky that he could save his life. The strength of this girl was much stronger than he had imagined. Her physique completely crushed his, and she had many kinds of abilities. He felt a bit like a trapped beast, unable to escape. Pain, anger, and a cold mood made it difficult for Dean to calm down, but he tried to hold back many distractions and forced himself to calm down. He did not think about what his future life would be like after breaking his leg, whether it would affect his future strength, whether he would become a waste. At this moment, he only thought about how to escape from here, or how to turn defeat into victory. However, as the girl said, the weakness of his ability was that it was too single. Although the ultimate attack was strong, if it was restrained, unable to attack the enemy, or if the enemy could withstand your attack, then you would lose all advantages. Blood Hunt. The girl slightly grinned, and her figure suddenly flew over. Dean's pupils shrank, and his vision was raised to the extreme. He captured the girl's figure, which was a little clearer than before. He could see her body, but it was still a little blurred. Whoosh! When she approached from the front, Dean was just about to defend, but the girl suddenly changed direction and appeared on the side. Dean had long been prepared, and his sharp blade quickly changed direction. However, the girl's figure turned again and appeared behind him. When his sharp blade turned back, the girl changed direction again and appeared on the left side. This time Dean's sharp blade could not keep up with her speed. He only felt a pain on the left side of his waist, and the girl's figure appeared more than 10 meters in front of him, with a piece of mixed carapace and flesh in her mouth. Dean looked at the bloody wound on his waist that was bitten. His face was ugly, but his brows were tightly wrinkled. He seemed to have seen the girl's specialty, and that was extreme speed change. She could still quickly change position and direction while moving at high speed. This was simply a godly existence in close combat, and this ability most likely came from the 8 strange claws in her lower body. Dean noticed that her strange claws were not only sharp, but also had some peculiar structure. There were cartilage and juvenile hooves on the inside of the claws. The credit for the rapid change of direction mostly came from these 2 structures. He had seen it before, but he did not think too much about it. After all, the structure of the demonic body was strange, and at most, he could roughly infer the type of the opponent's ability. Whoosh! The girl rushed over again. Dean's heart tightened, but he did not panic. His eyes flashed quickly, thinking of a solution. Puff! While he was thinking, the girl succeeded again, tearing a piece of flesh from his body. At this moment, he was like a weak tiger that could only let the falcon peck at it, unable to resist. When the girl rushed over again, Dean suddenly had a flash of inspiration. He put away the sharp blade on his body and covered the surface of his body like a feather. It looked like he was wearing a layer of armor, and his defense was greatly increased. The girl's mouth curved into a grin. She quickly approached and then quickly changed direction, continuously changing for directions. When Dean had no time to react, she suddenly attacked from the front. She believed that Dean had been attacked from the side and back several times in a row and had long been on guard against these places. Instead, he paid less attention to the front, so he did the opposite. However, when her claws and mouth came close, the sharp blade that was originally covering Dean's body like an armor suddenly opened, like a sudden erection of sharp thorn, ejecting at an extremely fast speed. Although the girl's speed was fast, she did not expect such a sudden reaction, and this method was also beyond her expectation, so she could not avoid for a while. Puff, puff, puff. Several bone-piercing sounds rang, accompanied by a scream. Dean felt his chest was hit hard, and he could not help but groan. His body flew out upside down, like a cloth bag thrown into the distance. When he hurriedly climbed up, he saw the girl standing 30 meters away. The arm that had been previously cut off and the other arm were all cut off from the elbow. There was also a very deep scratch on her neck, almost cutting off her jade neck. On her face, there were 2 scratches and a bloody hole, and the corner of her mouth was cut open, and blood kept flowing. Dean breathed a sigh of relief. Although he could not kill her, it was not bad to be able to seriously injure her. The girl screamed in pain, and her 8 strange legs violently trampled on the ground, crushing the weeds on the ground. Dean was about to take advantage of the situation to attack, but the screaming girl suddenly stopped, staring at Dean with blood-red eyes, and instantly exuded a murderous aura, which made Dean abruptly stop his body. At this moment, the girl was like a daughter of destiny, exuding a terrifying murderous aura, and just one look made Dean feel danger. He felt that the girl was not a coward, so he hesitated for a moment, but chose to stay still. The girl's ferocious face looked even more terrifying with the blood flowing. Coupled with her protruding teeth, it was as if she wanted to eat people. Just when Dean thought she would attack again, the girl suddenly looked up to the sky and issued a very loud roar. It lasted for a few seconds before stopping. Then she continued to stare at Dean, motionless. The two were deadlocked for a few minutes, and Dean's heart suddenly had a warning sign, thinking that the roar was a call. Thinking of this, he was suddenly scared out of cold sweat and could not continue to fight. He turned around and ran. He did not escape in the direction of Zaxi and Jason, but ran straight to the location of War God's Wall. After knowing that Dana was not really crazy, he knew that his previous plan had failed, and now the biggest problem was to leave alive. As for Zaxi and Jason, at the moment they were no different than dead people. He directly chose to give up. P.S. Attention Lamakes 666. Chapter 956. Wanna run? The girl saw Dean turn around and rush. Although she had a broken leg, she was not slow with the help of the sharp blade limbs and the wings on her back. Her reaction was also not slow. She flew away quickly like a rock spreading its wings. In the blink of an eye, she approached Dean's back. Whoosh! Dean, who was running for his life, suddenly turned around, and the sharp blades shot out like raindrops. The girl's figure flashed. She seemed to have expected it and dodged sideways. Dean saw that the sneak attack failed, but he did not stop. He continued to run forward, but when he turned around, his body shook with the sound of a bell. The girl heard the bell, but she did not care. Seeing Dean running away again, she immediately chased after him. Soon she closed the distance with Dean. Her body suddenly accelerated and got close to Dean's back. Whoosh! The sharp blades on Dean's back were thrown out. The girl's figure flashed, and she went around to the side like a ghost. Her claws stabbed toward a gap between the sharp blades on Dean's side. At this moment, Dean suddenly turned his head and looked at her fiercely. The girl was startled. She did not expect Dean to guess that she would attack this side. At this time, her claws had pierced into Dean's waist. Without waiting for her to stop, Dean suddenly roared and counterattacked. The girl looked at the swarming blades. Her face changed slightly, and she hurriedly retreated. Hiss! An extremely soft but sharp sound suddenly rang out. It came from behind. In the thrilling process of being pushed back by Dudian, the girl was still aware of the sharp sound. Her first reaction was surprise. Did he come so fast? But the next moment, the surprise suddenly turned into a chill. She suddenly thought that if he had rushed over, she should have sensed it in advance. In the time it took for a spark to fly off a flint, she hurriedly turned her head to look, only to see his scarlet body burning with raging flames pouncing towards her. Its pure black pupils and slightly sinister face caused her to turn pale with fright. Wasn't it the Corpse King who was stunned on the side before? Whoosh! Liquid flames spurted out of Aisha's mouth. She covered her face and rushed over, rolling toward the girl's back. At the same time, Aisha's demonized dragon claw was like an iron hook, and it rested on the girl's shoulder. A violent force tightened on the dragon claw, and the girl's body was suddenly pulled. In this moment of delay, Dean had already approached from the front, and his body was like a pear blossom piercing out. No! The girl screamed in terror. Poo-pee-you-pee-you. Blood splattered everywhere, and the sound of bones being cut rang out continuously. This sound was very pleasing to the ear because the cutting was very fast, and there was no lag. Thump! The ferocious head on the young girl's neck was cut off and fell to the ground. Her face was still incomparably ferocious, but her blood-red eyes gradually dimmed. Dean was about to continue to dismember her body, but the girl's arm suddenly pierced through the gap between the blades, aiming straight at Dean's heart. Dean's pupils shrank as he retreated. The headless girl turned her body and suddenly shot spikes and tentacles from her body. They hit Aisha's chest and pushed her away. Dean's eyes fell on the position of her abdomen. It was as smooth as white scales, but there was a faint outline of a girl's cheek. He had guessed it before, but he didn't expect it to be true. Her brain had been transferred to her body's abdomen during demonization. However, according to her height of about 1.6 meters before demonization, it was indeed in the position of her abdomen at the moment. It was just that during demonization, he only saw her body expand, but he didn't see her head move. Most likely, it had been transferred from the body's tissues. The flames were still burning the girl's back. Pieces of carapace like skin were burned off, and black viscous liquid seeped out from inside, exuding a fishy smell. It was like her blood, but also like rotten water that had settled in a stinky ditch. The black viscous liquid stained the flames, and the liquid flames that were difficult to extinguish gradually extinguished. Roar! Aisha roared and rushed forward again. The outline of the girl's abdomen cheek was clearly highlighted, and her expression became vivid. Previously, she had deliberately concealed this fatal point, but now that the decorative head on her neck had been cut off, this place had been exposed, and she didn't need to hide it anymore. At this moment, seeing Aisha rushing over without fear, her face changed slightly. She glanced at Dean, who was ready to attack, and then looked at Aisha, who had already rushed over. Whoosh! She immediately rushed to the side. However, the previous attack of Dean not only cut off her head, but also cut off her body. It also cut off 3 of her clawed legs. In addition, 2.5 of her strange legs were seriously injured in the previous battle. At this moment, she only had 2 legs that could barely be used, and her running speed was obviously not as fast as before. Aisha roared and chased after her. She opened her mouth and shot out a mouthful of liquid flame. The speed of the flame was faster than her own speed. The girl wanted to change direction quickly, but the only 2 good legs could barely make her fly in a straight line. Even if she turned a corner, her body felt shaky, and she was a little unbalanced. She couldn't adapt for a while. At this moment, she could only watch the liquid flame rushing in front of her. She puffed up her cheeks and spat out a thick black viscous liquid, which offset the liquid flame. Dean didn't let Aisha make a move before, because he considered that in case he was defeated by the girl, it would have a miraculous effect when he retreated. After all, the girl should not think that Aisha would be controlled by him. At this moment, letting Aisha make a move, the effect was better than he had imagined. From a disadvantageous situation to an advantageous position in the blink of an eye, the fact was always changeable. He immediately pursued the victory and cooperated with Aisha to attack from both sides. The girl stumbled to the woods not far away. Before she stepped into the woods, she was caught up by Dean and Aisha, one left and one right. You can actually control the Corpse King. The girl saw Aisha's strategic attack. How could she not know that she was controlled by Dean? She noticed that every time the Corpse King was about to make a new move, the bell would ring. The clear, sweet tinkle of the bell. At this moment, in her ears, it was like the bell of death. Roar! Aisha rushed to bite from the right side, her beautiful face full of ferocity. The girl's face changed slightly. She knew what the result of being bitten by the Corpse King was. Even if a Pioneer-level Corpse King bit her, it could infect her, not to mention that Aisha was obviously an Abyssal-level Corpse King, and her combat power was comparable to the Middle Abyss. She immediately dodged Aisha's attack and waved her claws to parry, but Dean suddenly appeared behind her. His sharp blade was like a knife, and several shadows flashed. The girl couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood and fell forward. On her back, a pair of short wings that had suddenly appeared were cut off. In addition, there were several vertical cracks on her back, deep to the bone, and blood kept flowing. Dean was about to take advantage of the situation to pursue. Suddenly, an extremely fast sound of breaking through the air sounded, as if something was quickly crossing the air like scratching a piece of silk, making a harsh sound. Dean's face changed greatly, and he hurriedly stopped his body. He saw a strong wind passing in front of his nose. If he continued to move forward 2 inches, most of his nasal bones would have been pierced. Dean spread out his full field of vision perception, and he immediately saw the direction of the strong wind without turning his head. An extremely burly man slowly walked out, with 2 demon-like curved horns on top of his head. His whole body was bronze-colored, and his muscles were strong, full of explosive power. His body was only half demon, roughly no different from human, but there were strange red patterns on his face, as if magma was flowing in his body, burning and cracking his body. When he turned to look at the heat source, Dean's face suddenly changed. It was as red as blood, incomparably thick and like the sun in the sky, emitting amazing heat. This heat spread more than 20 meters around his body, like a volcano rising day by day. Lord of the Abyss, Dean's heart slightly trembled. This heat source was much stronger than that of the girl. During the battle, the girl didn't hide her own heat source, but the heat she emitted was less than half of this, and the girl's strength was at the upper abyss. He thought of the previous scream of the girl, but he didn't expect that it was really a call. The person in front of him was their father? After a few seconds, Dean suddenly reacted. Looking at the girl who was rushing towards the strong man, his eyes flashed with killing intent. Suddenly, his speed was comparable to escaping, and he instantly caught up with the girl who only had 2 strange legs left. The sharp blades on his body were like wings, hugging her body from behind. The tip of the sharp blade was in the middle position in front of her, and as long as he used a little force, he could tear her body in half. The girl stopped, and her face was pale. She felt that the wound on her back was still pressed against by a sharp blade. It was Dean's demonized arm, and as long as it lightly pierced through her back, it would directly penetrate her abdomen. You leave first, and I will release your daughters and let them go back. Then we will meet again next time, Dean said quickly. It seemed that he was prepared for this. The burly man stared at him for a moment and sighed. He whispered, "Your little cleverness really makes me a little impatient." Dean was startled. A warning sign rose in his heart. The moment the strong man finished his words, his body suddenly disappeared. To be precise, he disappeared from Dudian's field of vision. He turned into a dark red afterimage and appeared in front of Dudian in a flash. Dean's tense heart jumped in fright. He held the girl's sharp blade and quickly stabbed into the girl's body. He believed that when the burly man attacked him from the side, he and the girl would perish together. At this moment of life and death, this was the only thing he could think of. Puff! Suddenly, a hard object pierced through his chest. The violent force shook his entire body, followed by a cold, tearing sensation and blazing pain at the same time. His eyes widened in disbelief as he stared at the brawny man in front of him. One of his arms had transformed into a giant pincer that pierced through the chest of the girl in front of him, piercing straight through his body, killing two birds with one stone. "You!" Dean was shocked. At the same time, the shadow of death shrouded over his head. He didn't have time to be in a daze. At this critical moment, his right arm released the demon form and revealed a huge ice claw. He fiercely hammered at the burly man. The burly man was startled. He raised his other arm that wasn't demonized to block. Bang! The ground shook slightly, and the force of the impact spread out. The strong man's body slightly swayed and leaned back more than 10 degrees, while Dean's body suddenly retreated. The giant pincer, stained with blood, separated from his chest, and blood sprayed everywhere. With the recoil force, Dean retreated to Aisha's side. He looked at the burly man whose arm was unscathed. His heart was shocked and cold at the same time. It must be known that the power of his ice claw was 10 times that of his left hand. It was comparable to the full blow of the upper abyss. However, the burly man didn't demonize and only relied on his human body to resist. Was this the power of the Lord of the Abyss? Or was it a stronger existence? Dad. The girl looked at the burly man who was hugging her. Her voice was weak, and she called out reluctantly. The strong man undid the demonization of his arm. When the giant pincer returned to its original form, it looked extremely slender. He pulled it back from her broken chest, and there was a trace of gentleness on his cold face. He said softly, "I hurt you. Wait for me here." As he said that, he used the hand that had pierced through her chest and was stained with blood to stroke her hair. His face was filled with love. The girl squeezed out a smile. She wanted to say something, but coughed up a mouthful of blood. The burly man slowly put her body on the ground. He looked up at Dean in front of him. The tenderness in his eyes had long disappeared. Instead, it was replaced by cold, killing intent. However, when his eyes fell on Dean's huge ice right arm, he was obviously startled. The killing intent in his eyes also converged a lot. He slightly frowned. Dean's eyes were gloomy. He didn't take the opportunity to escape. He knew that with his leg strength, he couldn't outrun the burly man. It would only be a waste of his physical strength. He thought about how to escape, but after thinking about it, he still couldn't come up with any hope. Was this the end of her life? He didn't feel too sad in his heart. He was just a little unwilling, a little regretful, and a little relieved. He had experienced so many times on the edge of life and death that he was already numb to this kind of feeling. The biggest regret was that he couldn't resurrect Aisha. This debt could only last until the next life, if there was a reincarnation in this world. You're smart not to escape. The burly man slowly walked toward Dean step by step. He said slowly, "Where is Dana? She's the first girl you caught." "Dead," Dean said expressionlessly. He didn't try to use Dana's life to make a deal. From a moment, the burly man pierced through the girl's chest without hesitation. Dean knew that the status of his 2 daughters in the burly man's mind might not be so high that he would make mistakes and take risks. "Do you want to die?" The burly man walked in front of Dean and looked down at him. Dean saw the distance between them, and his gray heart germinated a glimmer of hope. He was still expressionless. "Since I've fallen into your hands, I have nothing to say. I've killed people, and I'm ready to be killed. You're open-minded." The burly man slowly took 2 steps forward. But death isn't the most terrible thing. What do you want? Dean looked up at him. Torture? Abuse? Or get information about the Empire from my mouth? If you have these hobbies, I can satisfy you. As for the Empire, I don't mind telling you what you want to know. After all, I'm also a rebel. Chapter 958. Whoosh! Two sharp blades suddenly attacked the brawny man from the side. Dean was confident that he could cut the brawny man in half at such a close distance. The speed of the blades was so fast that he couldn't see them clearly. Clang! Clang! The two sharp sounds made Dean's eyelids jump. He saw that the two blades that the brawny man thrust out were pinched by the brawny man. His palms were covered with tortoise shell-like armor. There were complex patterns on them, as if he was wearing a layer of mechanical gloves. Blood overflowed from the brawny man's palms and slid down the blades. Tom seemed to stand still at this moment. The brawny man looked down at Dean with an expressionless face. He suddenly twisted his palm, and with two snapping sounds, Dean's two blade-like limbs were broken. Thick black blood oozed out from the broken blades. Is this your resistance? The brawny man quietly looked at Dean. Dean's heart sank to the bottom. He believed that the brawny man wouldn't be able to react even if he was the Lord of the Abyss if he was caught off guard, and they were so close to each other. But now he reacted. Not only did he demonize his palms at the critical moment, but he also caught the sharp blades. It could only mean that the brawny man was prepared, or his strength was greater than the Lord of the Abyss. Silence. There was a deathly silence. The brawny man looked at Dean, who was silent, as if his strength had been drained. He said indifferently, "Take me to Dana. I can leave your corpse intact, or let you die a quick death." His tone was like an order. It seemed that he knew Dean wouldn't refuse. Dean didn't refuse. It seemed that no one could refuse in the face of absolute strength. "Come with me." Dean was silent for a moment and slowly turned around. He wasn't worried about exposing his back to the brawny man. It would be easy for the brawny man to kill him with the strength shown by the brawny man. The burly man turned around and picked up the girl who was lying on the ground. His actions were gentle, and his cold eyes revealed a hint of gentleness. No one would believe that the girl in his arms was injured by him. Dean also picked up Aisha. He used the bell to let her release the demonization and return to the corpse puppet state. Then he led the way. The two of them walked along the plains and through the forest, their feet rustling in the mud and grass. They were silent along the way, as if they were a group of travelers. "Your right arm was caused by ice crystals?" The muscular man was the first to speak. "How did you come to the Battle God Wall? Did you come here directly from the Divine Wall?" Dean was expressionless. "Why can't they come from the Empire?" The burly man chuckled, seemingly in a good mood. "If the people of the Empire saw your right arm, you would have become a mouse in their hands. This is a taboo, don't you know?" "Taboo?" Dean was startled. He didn't expect that his right arm would be a taboo of the Empire. However, he didn't think that the burly man would lie to him. With the latter's strength, it was impossible for him to stay in the godly wall without being noticed. In all likelihood, he was a high-ranking member of the Empire and knew more than him. There was no need for him to lie to him. He thought of the dragon mother of the demon-hunting dragon clan, who turned her whole body into ice, and of the Vatican secretly capturing patients with the ice blood disease. He said, "What's so scary about that? At most, I'll just turn my whole body into ice. Although it's the power of self-destruction, it's not a taboo, right?" The burly man laughed. "It's not unusual for the whole body to be frozen, but it's rare for a part of your body to be frozen. It hasn't happened before. What's the difference?" Dean's eyes moved. He noticed that the reason why the burly man didn't kill him was not because he wanted to lead the way, but because he was interested in his right arm. "The difference is bigger than you think." The burly man chuckled and said, "Most people who are infected with the poison of the frigid ice crystal will start from a point and then use this point as the core to spread to the whole body. In other words, before the poison spreads, it will be like you, only a part of the body will be frozen. But the speed of the spread is very fast, especially when the body is frozen. The blood will flow through the whole body, and the whole body will be frozen. but there doesn't seem to be any signs of spreading. How'd you do it? Dean's eyes lit up. Maybe I'm lucky. It's not something that can be explained by luck. The burly man said meaningfully. Dean was silent and didn't speak again. The burly man didn't ask again. It seemed that they were just casually chatting. After a moment, Dean came to the place where they were going to stay tonight. He felt the smell of Jason and Zash's disguise. He slightly frowned as he slowly went up the mountain with the burly man. Halfway through, the brawny man's figure suddenly moved. He swept away from Dean's side like a gust of wind and disappeared in the blink of an eye. The next moment, 2 screams came from the top of the mountain. Dean was silent. He had seen through the heat source that Jason and Zaxite were aware of his return when he went up the mountain. Moreover, they were aware of the abnormality and fled in different directions. He deliberately chose to walk slowly to give them time to escape. But he didn't expect that the burly man was also aware of it. The two didn't escape far before they were caught by the burly man and thrown to Dana's side. He tightened his fingers as he slowly led Aisha up the mountain. He didn't take the opportunity to escape. With the burly man's speed, he estimated that he would be caught before he reached the foot of the mountain. Moreover, he knew what the burly man would see when he went up the mountain, so he didn't want to make an unnecessary struggle and anger the burly man. When he reached the top of the mountain, he saw Jason and Zash lying on the ground. They were groaning in pain. Their legs were broken and bent at a terrible angle. The bones inside were protruding out of the skin. Blood was dripping from the broken bones. Not far away from the two of them, the brawny man stood tall like a black tower. His entire body emanated a terrifying, murderous aura. His back was facing him, and his head was lowered. In front of him was Dinah, who was lying on the grass. Dinah, who only had her upper body and no hands left. From far away, Dean could feel the terrifying, murderous aura exuding from the brawny man's body. It was horrifying, and the pores of his whole body felt a chill like a thorn. Dean, you bastard. I'm going to kill you. Jason and Zash couldn't help but roar as they saw Dean climbing up the mountain. You betrayed us. You will die. Even if I die, I will curse you. Their faces were ferocious, and their eyes were full of resentment as they stared at Dean. They wished they could swallow Dean alive. Chapter 959. Dad. A weak voice came from Dana's mouth. Her originally dull eyes suddenly became clear, filled with excitement, grievance, and a trace of relief. Tears flowed from the corners of her eyes. No one knew what kind of humiliation and torture she had suffered during this period of time. Compared to the physical pain, the mental trauma that Zaxite and Jason had inflicted on her was the most painful for her. But she endured it. The reason why she had such tenacious willpower was because she knew that once Dean and the others succeeded, it would endanger her father's life. Even if she knew that Dean and the others were not her father's opponents, she wouldn't allow her father to be in danger. At the moment she looked at the strong man standing in front of her, she felt that everything was worth it. She had been waiting for this moment. Hearing Dana's voice, Jason and Tashi, who were roaring, froze on the spot as if they were struck by lightning. They turned their heads and looked past the muscular man at Dana, who was lying on the grass in front of him. After a long time, the two turned their heads stiffly. They looked at each other and slowly turned to Dean. They saw Dean gently shaking his head. There was a trace of coldness in his eyes. The two were startled on the spot. Their mouths were slightly open, but they couldn't speak. At this moment, they understood that Dana was not crazy at all. From the beginning to the end, Dana had been watching over their plans, and she had been watching over them. The two couldn't blame Dean. Their eyes were full of despair. Dad is here. The strong man squatted down and gently picked up Dana. It was as if he was holding a newborn baby. His face was full of gentleness. I'll take you home. I've finally waited for you. There was a sweet smile on Dana's face. She was a bit tired as she slowly closed her eyes and fell asleep. She had been working hard in the past few days and hadn't had a good rest. At this moment, she couldn't support it anymore. The strong man gently kissed her forehead and looked at her tenderly. After a long time, he slowly turned around. The tenderness on his face had turned into indifference. His eyes fell on Jason and Zaxi, who were on the ground. Elder, I didn't do it. It was him. They did it. I tried to persuade them, but they didn't listen to me. Zaxi's face was full of despair. He knelt towards a strong man and begged, "Please let me go. I'm willing to do anything for you, even if I have to be a pathfinder." Jason was angry, but at the same time terrified. He also crawled toward the strong man. "Elder, it was his idea. It has nothing to do with me. I have a lot of information to give you. I know the flaws of the war God's Wall. I also know the secrets of the Empire. Please let me go. I can be your subordinate and help you do anything." Both he and Zaxi knew that just crying and begging and showing an extremely humble attitude would not be enough to make people soft-hearted. In fact, it would only annoy them. But they wanted to tell the strong man as much as possible that they still had value and could bring help to him. The strong man looked at them expressionlessly. After a moment, he slowly opened his mouth. "How did you hurt her?" Seeing his question, the two seemed to have found a loophole and scrambled to answer. "He attacked her and cut her in half. We were going to follow her to see you, but we didn't expect him to suddenly attack. We saw that he had done it, so it was obviously impossible to continue to see you, so we could only accompany him to the end. He did it." The strong man narrowed his eyes and looked at Dean, who was not far away. Dean was in a cold sweat, but didn't open his mouth to defend himself. With the strong man's eyesight, even if they didn't say anything, he would be able to guess a few things. A debt of blood must be paid with blood. I'll let you live, but you can't escape punishment. The strong man's tone was gentle. He didn't have the anger and coldness that they had imagined. As soon as his words fell, a few strong winds swept past them. Zaxi and Jason were slightly startled. The next moment, they felt a chill coming from their arms. The two turned around and saw that both of their arms had fallen to the ground, broken at the shoulder. The pain was like a needle piercing into their brain. Both of them screamed in pain, but didn't dare to scream too loudly in order to avoid annoying the strong man. They had dominated the life and death of many people. Naturally, they knew what kind of scene they didn't like to see. The strong man's body didn't seem to move. Even Dean, who was watching him, didn't see how he did it. The strong man looked at both of them, who were grimacing in pain, but didn't dare to scream. His eyes flashed a trace of coldness. He glanced at Dean, who was not far away. "Take them and follow me back." Then he turned and walked away. Dean sighed in his heart. He went forward to Zaxi and Jason's side. Both of them looked up at him. There was anger in their eyes, but they restrained themselves. They let Dean pick them up one by one. Their faces turned ugly as they looked at the arms on the ground. They wanted to ask Dean to help them pick up their arms, but they didn't dare to. As long as the arms were there was a possibility of healing. But since the strong man intended to cut off their arms, it was hard to guarantee that he wouldn't do something else if he saw them trying to reconnect their arms. Dean carried them to keep up with the strong man's pace while they were hesitating. There was silence along the way. Occasionally, a monster would jump out of the soil and attack the strong man in front of them. The strong man didn't make any move, but the monster's body was broken. Blood sputtered and fell to the ground. Dean and others once again returned to the iron smelting plain. They passed through the underground mine and the underground furnace where they smelted iron and steel. The three of them immediately saw the footprints of the strong man and another pair of small feet. Obviously, they had been here before. "Did you do this?" the strong man asked as he passed by the furnace. "I did it," Dudian said. "Do you know smelting? What did you do before?" The strong man's tone was flat. It seemed that they were just chatting. Dean felt that the man was moody, so he didn't dare to relax. "I studied tailoring and medicine. I know a little bit about smelting and purification." "You have learned a lot," the strong man indifferently said. "It's just a casual study," Dean replied modestly. Compared to the other abyssal demons who only focused on hunting and combat techniques, as well as magical creatures and politics, he was indeed rich in life skills. Moreover, he knew far more than that, although he did not say it all out. He wanted to keep some trump cards for himself. Although the situation was bad enough, who knew if there was any hope of survival? Zash and Jason's eyes were gloomy as they heard the conversation between the two. Dean was the mastermind behind the attack on Dana. Why were they the most miserable? On the contrary, Dean seemed to be fine. However, they could only think about it. They weren't stupid enough to complain to the strong man. Not long after, the few of them walked along the plain and arrived at the edge of the area. There was a barren mountain here, and the mountain was covered with jagged rocks. It was mainly made of sand and large rocks. The burly man stopped and found a patch of sand. He reached his hand into the sand and pulled it up. The sand quickly slid down, and a black iron cover was lifted up. Inside was a pitch-black staircase that led deep underground. "Go in," the strong man said to Dean. Dean took Aisha, Jason, and Zach's side into the room. They had the dark vision so they wouldn't stumble. With a creak, the muscular man walked in and closed the metal cover, blocking out the last bit of light. After walking down the stairs for about 20 meters, the stairs were no longer stairs, but a 2-meter wide path. At the end of the path was a heavy iron door. Chapter 960. The brawny man passed by Dean and pressed on the wall next to the iron door. Dean had already seen through the wall that there was a hidden mechanism that connected bearings and lead wires. The iron door slowly opened as the brawny man pressed on the loose wall. There were sharp blades and poisonous arrows buried in the top and bottom of the iron door. If someone forcibly destroyed the iron door, then the mechanism would be triggered. It was still a dark world behind the iron door. Everything was hazy in the darkness, but Dean could clearly see that it was an extremely spacious room. There were sofas made of animal fur and fabric, tables, and rows of bookshelves and spacious tables. There were messy papers piled on top of them. In addition, there were several strange instruments in the open space of the room. Dean recognized one of them. It was a microscope. From the shape and the steel, it seemed to be from the old era. The brawny man touched the wall when he entered the door. Suddenly the room was lit up with a dazzling light. The color was orange. The light was soft and warm. Zashite and Jason were startled by the sudden light. Their eyes widened in shock. The strong man gently put Dana on a sofa and covered her with the animal fur blanket on the sofa. Then, he turned around and put the drooping girl on another sofa. When he bent down to put her down, he suddenly let out a soft cry of surprise. Dean's eyebrows twitched when he heard the man's voice, but returned to normal. The burly man frowned as he stared at the girl. Her face was completely red, but it wasn't because she was shy. Instead, it was as if she had a fever. Her face was so red that it almost seeped out of her skin. Her eyes were tightly closed, and her brows were furrowed. He reached out his hand to touch her arm, and then reached into her clothes to touch her back, but he felt his hand was wet with sweat. If it was an ordinary person, then he would think that it was a cold or a fever. But who was the girl? How could she get a cold or a fever? The bacteria that caused the fever could be easily erased by her resistance. A look of contemplation flashed in the man's eyes. He suddenly thought of something and lifted the girl's eyelids. He saw that her eyes were bloodshot, and the ends of these bloodshot veins were faintly black. The brawny man retracted his hand and turned his head. His eyes fell on Dean. There was a trace of coldness in his eyes. Dean saw his expression and said bitterly, "You can't blame me. I just want to save my life." The brawny man looked at him coldly. His eyes suddenly swept to Aisha. "If I'm not wrong, if I didn't meet her, you would have used the undead virus to deal with me." Dean reluctantly said, "How could we? We wouldn't dare to do anything to you." "Really?" The brawny man sneered. "If you don't dare, then why would you come back here in a big circle?" Dean could only shut up. Since the strong man had already guessed it, there was no need to continue to hide. Whoosh, whoosh. Only the sound of heavy breathing could be heard in the silent room. The sound came from a young girl's mouth. Her chest rose and fell faster and faster, and her heart rate continued to rise. The blood flow in her body also sped up, which also caused her body temperature to rise rapidly. If one looked closely, they would find that between the gaps of her lips as she breathed heavily, her originally smooth and white teeth were gradually becoming sharp, like the teeth of a canine. Zash and Jason were bewildered as they saw the girl's appearance. The brawny man looked at Dudian. "I'll deal with you later. The three of you stay here and behave yourself." He picked up the girl from the sofa and quickly walked into the room. He opened another door and went in. Bang! The door was closed. The sound made Zash and Jason tremble. Both of them were like frightened birds. Zash was surprised after the brawny man left. Is she infected with the virus? Dean sighed as he threw them to the ground. I met her on the road. I would have died if I didn't save my life. I was forced to protect myself. Zash and Jason looked at each other with bitter taste in their mouths. When they kidnapped Dana and tortured her, they had already touched the reverse scale of the strong man. Now his second daughter was also in their hands, and she was infected with the walking dead virus, which was irreversible. Her situation was even worse than Dana's. They didn't dare to imagine what kind of rage they would have to endure. The brawny man came out of the room. Dean saw through the door that the brawny man had sent the girl to. There was a huge cage in the laboratory. There were many other cages there, and many strange things were locked in them, including the undead. At this moment, the young lady had also become one of them. His mood was complicated. He couldn't tell if he was happy or disappointed, but he felt more disappointed. It was not because the strong man didn't care about his family. This had nothing to do with him, but because he had a trick up his sleeve. He was looking forward to seeing a glimmer of hope from the strong man, but he didn't expect that the strong man also seemed to be helpless against this virus. The brawny man went straight to the sofa and sat down. He picked up a towel and wiped his hands. He glanced at Dean, Jason, and Zash. Do you know why I didn't kill you? The three of them were silent. Even if they had guesses in their hearts, they didn't dare to say it. The burly man wiped his hands and said casually, Of my two daughters, one is injured and the other is infected by a virus. They are basically dead. One dead and one injured. This hatred is not enough to be resolved by just killing you. The three of them felt their hearts sink. Zash carefully said, Elder, this is all because of him. He is the main culprit. We are at most accomplices. I am willing to do anything for you. I am absolutely loyal to you. I hope you can forgive my mistakes. He spoke in a very sincere manner. It seemed that he had become the slave of the brawny man. Dean was indifferent as he heard his words. There was no change in his expression. He didn't defend himself. The brawny man's eyes fell on Dean as if he didn't hear Zash's words. He slowly said, You just need to do one thing for me. If you're lucky, then maybe you can survive. Jason and Zash's eyes lit up. Although they knew that it might be difficult, but they still saw hope. Hope can always cheer people up. Dean was silent like a stone. There was no expression on his face. Sir, please tell me. I will definitely do my best. Zaxi quickly expressed. Me too. Jason didn't want to be outdone. The brawny man nodded. I am lacking some abyssal-level experimental materials. The three of you stay here and accompany me to complete my experiment. I hope you can survive to the end. Experiment? Experimental materials? Chapter 9:61. Zaxi and Jason had more or less contact with a monster research institute inside the wall. Naturally, they knew how terrible the experiments were. The brawny man said that he was going to use them as experimental subjects. Naturally, he was going to conduct human experiments or demonic modification experiments. The number of people sacrificed in these experiments was even more than the number of people killed in the war. However, most of the people used in these experiments were vagrants or poor people. So the impact on the peace of the entire godly wall wasn't that obvious. Dean's eyes were gloomy. He had a hunch that the robust man would use them as experimental subjects. But he didn't expect that they would be treated as experimental subjects. He remembered what Dana said when he interrogated her. Her father liked to do experiments. Now it seemed that it was true. Moreover, from the layout of the base, it seemed that the robust man's level of experimentation was extraordinary. Elder, why don't we find other abyssal-level warriors for you? Zaxi's desire to survive was very strong. I could go to the God of War wall and lure the soldiers there to attack us. Then we can take the opportunity to capture them. We are defectors, so we won't go to them again. So you can rest assured and leave it to us. Yes. Jason's eyes lit up. With the three of us working together, we can lure a few abyssal demons over and capture them. If that doesn't work, You can just watch from the side and easily capture them. We can be the bait, and you will have an endless supply of experimental materials." He winked at Dean and signaled him to help persuade the robust man. Dean was silent and didn't speak. The robust man didn't wait for Zaxi to continue to speak as he raised his hand to interrupt them. "Of course, I have considered this point. But the aliens have just invaded the God of War wall, so they won't invade again for the time being. The soldiers on the God of War wall won't easily come down because of a few defectors like you. Even if they want to hunt you down, they will come in the form of a small team. But there is still you," Zaxi quickly said, as he was afraid that the robust man would dispel the idea. The robust man shook his head. "There are more secrets in the God of War wall than you think. Once I get close, I will be detected. This is the border of the Empire. Do you think that the sensors here will be so weak?" Zaxi, Tay, and Jason were stunned and speechless. They suddenly thought that the brawny man was hiding in the isolated land outside the giant wall. Most of them had the same identity as them. Either he couldn't stay in the giant wall, or he was expelled. They were all wanted targets, so they didn't dare to expose their identity. If there was a chance, they could use this information to exchange for a chance of survival with the Battle God Wall. However, the Battle God Wall would most likely not let them leave this place. "My name is Be on the Lookout. You can call me Doctor from now on. As for your names, I'm not interested. Just call me by number. Your number 1, your number 2, and your number 3. The strong man pointed at Zaxit, Jason, and Dean. He got up and went to the shelf next to him. He opened a drawer and took out 3 purple glass bottles. There was a purple liquid inside the bottles. Placing the 3 bottles on the table, Baluo glanced at the 3 of them and said, "1 bottle each, drink it." Zaxit and Jason looked at each other hesitantly. "Is this the experiment?" Zaxi Tay asked carefully. Baluo's eyes turned cold. "Don't waste my time. I'll give you 10 seconds. Don't force me to start." Zaxi and Jason clenched their teeth and grabbed a bottle each. They unscrewed the cork and hesitated for a moment before closing their eyes and drinking the whole bottle. Dean also grabbed a bottle. His eyes lit up as he unscrewed the cork and poured it into his mouth. His throat slightly rolled. Putting down the bottle, Zaxi looked at himself and suddenly felt a little uncomfortable. Then he felt a sharp pain in his buttocks. He turned his head and saw nothing. Then he felt as if all the blood in his body was rushing to his buttocks. Then his blood suddenly flowed in reverse, and he almost spat out a mouthful of blood. When he managed to hold it in, he felt his limbs go soft, as if he had not slept for a few months. His whole body could not move, and his mind was in a mess. He could not even open his eyes. So tired. Zaxi could not gather and struggled, and he slowly closed his eyes. Plop! He fell down. Shortly after he fell down, there was another plop. Jason also fell down. Behind them, Dean's body swayed and softly fell down. Baluo looked on coldly. He coldly snorted. "Number 2 and number 3, the 2 of you, stand up." Number 2 was Jason and number 3 was Dean. Both of them didn't respond. Burrow slightly sneered, once again taking out 2 bottles of purple liquid from the drawer next to him. At the same time, he took out a copper syringe, stepped forward and grabbed one of Jason's arms, sucked the syringe into the purple liquid, and then injected it into their arms. Jason's arm trembled as the syringe was inserted into his arm. He wanted to struggle, but Baluo's knee suddenly pressed against his back. He was instantly pressed to the ground and couldn't resist. He groaned in pain as the purple liquid was injected into his body. Dean didn't think that Jason didn't swallow the purple liquid, but deliberately imitated Zaxit's reaction and pretended to be unconscious. He didn't think that his and Jason's performance would be seen through. He thought that there was no problem with his reaction. Did the other side have the same X-ray vision ability as him? He slowly sat up while thinking. At this moment, Baluo had finished injecting Jason. He turned around and saw that Jason was sitting up. Baluo expressionlessly sucked the purple liquid into the syringe and grabbed Jason's arm to inject it into his blood vessels. Soon, Dean felt a sharp pain in his chest. It was the location of his magic marks. Then, the blood in his body seemed to concentrate towards his chest. His heartbeat was fierce, and he couldn't breathe. But the next moment, all the blood seemed to evacuate, and then he felt extremely tired. He secretly clenched his teeth, but in the end his eyes turned black, his brain buzzed, and he fell down. When his head hit the ground, he called out the only thought left in his mind. It sounded more like he was moaning in sleep. "Don't hurt her." "I know." He didn't finish his words before he completely fainted. Boluo looked at the unconscious Dean and glanced at the motionless figure standing next to him. His mouth slightly curved. "Even if you didn't say it, I would have kept her. It's the first time I've seen such a strange corpse king." His limbs were cold. When Dean woke up again, he found himself in a dark cage. He was startled for a moment. He turned around, but didn't see Aisha. He gritted his teeth and stood up. His limbs were soft, but he still stepped forward and grabbed the iron pillar in front of him. "Boluo! Boluo! Roar! Roar! Hiss! Hiss!" The response to Dean was a burst of beastly roars and strange sounds. Dean noticed that he wasn't the only one in this silent cell. There were two cages next to him and Jason. Both of them seemed to be in a comatose state. He also saw the girl who was infected with the virus. But at the moment, she was completely awake. She was wandering in her cell. Her hands and feet were shackled like a walking corpse. His cry naturally alarmed the girl. She immediately rushed to the iron pillar of the cage, grabbed the iron pillar, and roared at Dean. Her eyes were pure black. Impressively, she had turned into a king of corpses. Dean was surprised. He noticed that there were other strange monsters in the cage next to her. At the moment, they were disturbed by his cry. They struggled and hit the iron bars in the cage. This is the previous cell. Dean was startled. He found that his vision wasn't so clear. The light in the cell wasn't pure black. There were several electric lights on the walls. There were also several light bulbs hanging in the middle of the aisle. He could see the places where the light shone, but he couldn't see the shadows in the depths of the cell. Chapter 962. After a moment of experiment, Dean discovered that he had lost not only the dark vision, but also his strength and magic mark ability. Right now, he only had his physical strength, which had been greatly weakened. He was probably only at the level of a pioneer. Without the Splitter's magic mark, it was like the magic mark had been stripped from his body, but the magic mark on his chest was still there. He thought of the purple liquid that was injected into his body. It should be the thing that suppressed his magic mark ability. I don't know if it is permanent or time-limited. Dean thought in his heart. It was the first time he encountered such a magical drug that could make an abyss person lose his magic mark ability. Squeak. The door to the cell was pushed open, and the burly Boluo walked in. He snorted coldly, and in an instant, the entire noisy cell fell silent. The terrifying shadows in the cages trembled and stopped making a ruckus, curling up in the shadows. Only the young girl who was biting on the bars continued to growl, her pure black eyes filled with malevolence and brutality. Burrow looked at her and sighed. He walked along the aisle to the front of her cage and quietly looked at her. The girl reached out from the cage. She was full of bloodthirst. Burrow stared for a moment and slowly turned his head to look at Dean. "You know the way to control the undead, don't you?" Dean was silent and didn't deny it. It wasn't that he didn't want to cover up the secret, but he couldn't. Although Burrow looked rough on the outside, but he was meticulous. He would be able to see through Aisha's abnormality on the way back. After all, Aisha followed him like a shadow. This was a strange thing in itself. Did you get this method from the Empire or from the ruins? Burrow didn't directly ask about the method, but asked about the source. Dean stared at him. "Where is she?" "She's very good." Burrow looked at him meaningfully. "Without your control, she seems to be just a puppet." "She's not a puppet," Dudian immediately corrected. "I said it seems to be," Burrow casually said. "She is not," Dean said in a deep voice. Burrow slightly frowned. There was a trace of understanding in his eyes. "Is she your lover? Or a relative?" "Well, I've seen a lot of people like you. In today's world, it's not uncommon to be infected with a virus. There will always be some people whose friends or relatives are infected with the virus, but they can't do anything about it. Even I can't change the people who are infected." At this point, A trace of pain flashed across the bottom of his eyes, but it was hidden very deeply and disappeared in a flash. Then, his expression returned to normal and continued. However, you are the first person to be able to control someone infected by the virus. Even those despicable fools in the Empire couldn't find a way. If you want to live a better life, you can tell me the method. Dean was silent. Burrow also seemed to be very patient, quietly watching him, waiting. After a moment, Dean slowly opened his mouth. This method is not unusual. It's just that you were focused on drugs and research and didn't think of this aspect. Oh, Burrow was interested. Do you know about conditioned reflex? Dean didn't hide the method. Although it seemed that mastering this method was his trump card, but he knew that even if he didn't say it, Burrow had a way to make him confess. For example, using Aisha to coerce him or using drugs to destroy his willpower. Although he thought that he was strong enough, but the reality could often easily break his stubborn shell. Many strong-willed people bowed their heads in front of drug addiction. Conditioned reflex? Burrow was startled, but suddenly realized. He had studied biology for many years and naturally knew the most basic knowledge. At this moment, he knew what was going on and couldn't help but laugh. I didn't expect that such a simple thing would be placed in front of us, but everyone turned a blind eye to it. What a conditioned reflex. Ha! Burrow couldn't help but laugh. But his laughter was full of ridicule. Dean didn't know if he was laughing at himself or others. When the laughter stopped, he looked at Dean with eyes full of appreciation. Using conditioned reflex to control the undead, you can really think of it. This training process must be extremely painful and difficult, right? Fortunately, Dean didn't show any pride or joy. He calmly said, "Compared to your research, this is just superficial. I've heard about cloning before, but never seen it. I didn't expect you to put this rumor into practice and be so successful. If you were still in the Empire, with this achievement alone, it should be enough to surpass tens of thousands of people, second only to the Seven Kings." Bo Luo raised an eyebrow, a cold smile on his face. "Even without this, I still stand above all others." Seven Kings? To think that I was also a king tier in the past, but at this point, he frowned as if he had thought of something unpleasant. He stopped talking and didn't continue. Dean's pupil shrank as he listened to Burrow's words. Once a king, Bulo was actually a king. Looking at Dean's incredulous look, Burrow coldly snorted. "What's so strange about kings? They are just a group of cowards who are struggling to survive. What's ridiculous is that everyone thinks that they're great heroes. They worship and love them. They're willing to be driven around like cattle and horses. Ridiculous." His face showed undisguised ridicule, disgust, and contempt. Dean was startled. He was puzzled and asked, "Struggling to survive? They're the strongest existence among us humans. Do they need to be so humble?" When Baluo heard his words, he sneered but didn't say anything more. He just said, "Seeing that you're honest, I'm telling you this. It's also a reward for telling me the method to control the undead. As for the other things, you don't need to know. It's not something you can come into contact with. It's useless even if you know. An ant has an ant's life. They don't know the immensity of the heavens and earth. They can still live happily every day. Why think so much?" Dean was silent. In his heart, he wanted to say whether he was an ant or a dragon. How could he say it? However, when he thought about it, it seemed like it was really up to him. If he killed him now, he would really become an ant whose life was as worthless as grass in the wilderness. What was a mere abyss compared to the masses of living beings? It was just a star that had dimmed in the vast sea of stars. Who would notice it? Dean put away his thoughts as he saw Burrow was about to leave. He quickly stopped him. "Have you removed my magic marks? What kind of experiment are you going to use me for?" "It's not removal. What's the use of having you removed?" Burrow glanced at him. "But your current state is no different from having your magic marks removed. I advise you to be honest and don't try to escape. There are many traps here. Be careful not to lose your life." He turned and strode away. Dean was disappointed that Burrow didn't mention anything about the experiment, but he knew that Burrow wouldn't tell him. After Burrow left, Dean looked at Jason and Zaxit. Did you hear that? The unconscious Zaxite, and Jason slowly sat up. Jason sighed and said, It seems like we are really going to die here. This person was actually a king in the past. Zaxite's eyes were still filled with shock, and he said with lingering fear, We actually tried to kill a king. We were crazy. Jason laughed bitterly. He suddenly thought of something and said, I seem to have heard that there was a king who betrayed the empire and escaped. Could it be him? Zaxi looked at him in astonishment. Where did you hear that? A wall lord. Jason didn't elaborate, but sighed. Now we can only resign ourselves to fate. Zash's face was gloomy. I should have followed Dana from the beginning. I wouldn't have been reduced to a prisoner. Dean glanced at him and said in a cold voice, The other side brought us here just to save trouble. The other side has already planned to use us as his test subjects. At least it's better than the current treatment. Zaxi angrily looked at him. He was angry with Dean, but Dean's strength was higher than him, so he could only swallow his anger and obey Dean. But at the moment they were prisoners, so he wasn't afraid that Dean would attack him. Moreover, Burrow had said that they didn't have any combat effectiveness. Stupid. Dean snorted. It's all your fault. Zaxi gritted his teeth and looked at him. Enough. Jason growled and stared at Zash. What's the use of quarreling? Besides, duty is right. Didn't you see that the one in front of us is also his daughter? If he really has deep feelings for his daughter, he would have tortured us to death long ago. Even if there is value in keeping us alive for experiments, we can't avoid the torture. Living a life worse than death is unavoidable. If you want to blame something, blame it on us for fleeing in the first place. Should we wait for death? Aren't we going to die now? Who knew that it would be like this? Oh. Dean sat back in the depths of his cage and looked at his broken left leg. He slightly rubbed the scar. Previously, he relied on the demonized blade to support his left leg. But now he had lost his demonized ability and became a cripple. He often walked by the river until his shoes got wet. Compared to other hunters who often left the giant wall to hunt, most of them retired with a crippled body. He had been around for so many years, but he only lost one leg today. He was lucky. Chapter 963. The next day, Burrow came to the cell, opened the cage, and took Zaxi away. Not long after they left, Dean and Jason heard faint screams coming from under the floor. It seemed to be Zaxi's voice. Their faces turned gloomy. In the dark cell, Dean could only judge the time by the degree of hunger in his stomach. But he knew that the longer he stayed here, the more blurred his body functions would be. So he couldn't judge the time anymore. At about 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening, the cell was opened. A girl wearing a white dress pushed a metal cart and slowly walked in. Dean and Jason couldn't help but slightly change their expressions when they saw her face. It was Dana, but soon Dean found that this Dana wasn't the same person as the first Dana he met before. Although the appearance was the same, but there was a difference in temperament. He could distinguish it at a glance. Dean was silent as he thought of Burrow's cloning experiment. He didn't know how many Danas were in this underground base. The Dana in the white dress didn't seem to notice Dean and Jason. She pushed the metal cart and stopped in front of the first row of cages. She lifted the white cloth on the cart, and there were 4 metal barrels inside. She opened the lid of one of the barrels. The smell of meat overflowed. The shadows in the cages roared, but they didn't dare to hit the bars. They saw her pick up a metal spoon from the cart and scoop out a spoonful of broth. There were a few pieces of fat floating in the bucket. She poured it into the stone trough next to the door of the first cage. The shadows inside couldn't hold back anymore. They rushed over and licked the broth. Dean and Jason, who had been hungry for a day, heard the sound. They couldn't help but salivate. The girl scooped 2 spoonfuls of broth and continued to push the cart to the second row of cages. The whole cell was filled with the sound of licking, swallowing, and chewing of bones. Glancing at Dean, the girl's expression was indifferent. She scooped out a spoonful of broth and poured it into the stone trough in front of Dean, and then added another spoonful. There were 2 pieces of cartilage and fat, and the meat was stained with black hair. The smell of meat drifted out of the stone trough. Being hungry for a day was not enough to numb Dean's taste. Looking at the meat soup and meat pieces that were half submerged in the stone trough, he frowned slightly and hesitated for a long time. Finally, he reached out and drank the meat soup. He grabbed the meat pieces and stuffed them into his mouth. He did not dare to taste the extremely strong smell of meat, so he chewed a few times and swallowed. When he ate a few pieces of fat meat with black hair on them, he felt disgusted, but he still pulled the hair off and ate it with a dark face. The taste was indescribable. Ever since he came out of the slums of Sylvia, he had rarely found food so hard to swallow. What is this? Suddenly, Jason's slightly trembling voice came from his side. Dean's heart tightened. He turned his head and saw Jason holding something under the light of the aisle. However, the appearance of this thing was too easy to identify. It was a finger, a human finger. Dean's pupils shrank. In an instant, he felt like his stomach was hit by a heavy punch. His stomach tumbled, and the gastric juices rushed to his throat. He covered his mouth and clenched his teeth. The veins on his face bulged and twitched slightly. Finally, he took a deep breath and swallowed the thing that had rushed to his throat and mouth. Then he felt like collapsing. He leaned against the iron bars and gasped for breath. After Jason saw it clearly, he vomited on the ground. After coughing for a long time, he slowly raised his head, shook off the stewed and swollen finger, and threw it into the cage next to him. The shadow that had finished eating the broth in the stone trough smelled the smell and immediately rushed over, picked up the broken finger, and ate it like enjoying a delicious meal. Dean's mind slightly moved as he saw this scene. The girl pushed the dining cart to the last row of the cell. After scooping out all the things, she pushed the cart back again. She saw Jason vomit on the ground and curled her lips slightly. It seemed like she was sneering, but she didn't say anything and left the cell. Bastard. As soon as the girl left, Jason punched the ground. His face was full of anger. Dean was silent, but his eyes were cold. Although they had killed countless people and seen countless limbs and internal organs, they had never thought of eating people, especially eating people himself. This feeling was even more disgusting. It even made him feel that his body was being tarnished. After the anger, Dean and Jason fell into silence. The cell was very quiet. Only the snoring sound came from the other cages. It seemed that they were snoring in sleep. Dean's thoughts calmed down. He unconsciously thought of the finger in the broth. Whose was it? Was it Zaxby's or someone else? Or were they not the only ones imprisoned here? After a long, long time, Dean felt that it was noon of the next day, but he still didn't see Zaxby being brought back. The girl pushed the dining cart again, but this time it wasn't broth, but weeds, mushrooms, and mushrooms. Dean's face turned ugly as he looked at the arm-long weeds, mushrooms, and 3 palm-sized mushrooms that were assigned to him. He couldn't help but ask the girl, "Can we eat this? Is it poisonous?" The girl handed the food to Dana, who had the same appearance as her. She glanced at Dean and said, "Don't worry. Eat your food. You won't die. Dad still has a use for you." Dean was a little relieved. But looking at the raw mushrooms and mushrooms, as well as the weeds that could be seen everywhere outside, he felt that he didn't know where to eat. However, thinking that the broth might be sent in the evening, he bit the bullet and grabbed the raw mushrooms and ate them. "Why did you eat the broth yesterday? What kind of stew was that?" Jason suppressed his anger, but his tone was still not good. The girl indifferently said, "Anyway, it wasn't your hand. Why do you care so much?" Jason slightly gritted his teeth. When the girl walked past him, he quickly called out, "I haven't given it to you yet. Didn't you vomit yesterday? Since you are not hungry, there is no share for you today," the girl said without looking back. Jason was so angry that he almost died. He stared at her back with hatred. The girl suddenly turned her head, and her eyes fell on Jason's line of sight. Chapter 964. By the time the girl left, Dean had finished eating all the mushrooms and mushrooms in his stone trough. The seemingly weedy grass was not as difficult to swallow as he had imagined. The taste was bitter, but it was not rough. It was easy to swallow after chewing it up. After eating, he leaned against the iron pillar and continued to be in a daze. Time passed quickly as he was immersed in his thoughts. When Dean felt a little hungry, the cell door opened again. It was the girl in the white dress. Her dress fluttered in the wind. Coupled with her quiet and beautiful face, she looked like an angel. The only thing missing was a pair of wings and a halo. The girl pushed the dining cart to feed the cage. Her dress seemed to flutter as she walked. Two tiny shadows could be seen on her well-developed breasts, with a different kind of temptation. However, Dean's taste was biased towards maturity. He had no feeling for this kind of young girl, especially when he knew the true face hidden under the white dress. He felt even more indifferent and even disgusted. Just like yesterday, 2 spoonfuls of broth were scooped into the stone trough. Dean glanced at it and slowly moved closer to it. The girl continued to feed the other cages, but skipped Jason. After the girl left, Dean looked up from the stone trough. The broth in the stone trough was not reduced at all. He just pretended to lie on his stomach, lest the girl saw that he did not eat and cut off his lunch tomorrow. Although he was ruthless enough, thinking that today's broth might be cooked with human flesh mixed with monster flesh, he felt it difficult to swallow. He was still rational as long as he was not extremely hungry. "You don't want to eat?" A voice came from his side. Dean looked over and saw Jason licking his dry lips, looking at the stone trough in front of him. From time to time, a trace of heat flashed in his eyes. "Do you want to eat?" Dean looked at him quietly. The heat in Jason's eyes suddenly dissipated, as if he had sobered up. He hesitated for a moment and said with difficulty, I don't want to eat. I just want to drink some soup. I'm too thirsty. I was injured before and my body is seriously dehydrated. Can you give me a little?" Dean was silent. After a long while, he slowly reached out and scooped up a handful of broth from the stone trough. He passed it to Jason through the gap between the iron bars. Jason looked at the broth in Dudian's hands. His eyes flashed a trace of complex color. He whispered, "Thank you," and slowly drank the broth faster and faster. Dean could feel his tongue licking the palm of his hand. It was wet and hot, like a dog. He suddenly felt disgusted, but he didn't move his hand away. He just watched silently, his heart full of bitterness and anger as deep as the sea. He abandoned his dignity and lived a lowly life just to survive. Was this the fate of every life that was born to be tormented like this? If there really was a God, did he create life just to play with it? Thank you. Jason's words made Dean recollect his thoughts, and the deep anger gradually buried in his chest. Then he once again scooped up a handful of broth and handed it to him. Suddenly he felt like a lake in this mountain, occasionally splashed by the rain from the sky, but eventually returned to silence, as if nothing had happened. He was still looking up at the sky, reflecting its posture. Who was not like this among all living beings? Jason's hunger and thirst eased after eating 3 handfuls of broth. He resisted the urge to refuse as he saw Dean was about to give him more. He said thank you and turned back to the depths of his cage. He leaned against the wall and didn't say a word. Dean glanced at him, turned his head, and picked up the rest of the broth, throwing it into the stone trough on the other side of the cage. The shadow in the cage was immediately attracted by the broth and rushed over to lick it. With the help of the light, Dean saw its appearance clearly. It was a wolf-like monster, but it had 3 tails. The hair on the tail was thicker, and at the tip of the tail was a sharp horn. Moreover, under its abdomen, there was a carapace like fine, strange limbs that coiled around each other. It seemed to be a hidden attack weapon. Soon, the monster finished licking the broth in the stone trough. It looked up at Dudian. Its green fluorescent eyes had a bit of human light. It let out a low roar. Dean smiled, grabbed the meat from the stone trough, and threw it over. The monster immediately caught it with its mouth and ate it. Dean gave it the broth and a few pieces of meat in the stone trough. After the monster finished eating, it still looked at Dean eagerly. When Dean said no more, it was still unmoved, until Dean did not throw it anymore. It turned its head and shrank back to the corner. The next day, the girl came to the cell again and gave Dean and Jason weeds and mushrooms for lunch. "Where is our companion?" "He was taken out by her father." "Why hasn't he come back yet?" Dean took the opportunity to ask her. It's none of your business. The girl glanced at him and walked away. Seeing that he could not get any information, Dean frowned slightly, but did not ask any more questions. This continued for 4 or 5 days. Every day, Dean only ate weeds and mushroom vegetables at noon, and the broth in the evening was all given to the monster next to him. The monster, who had been eating his meat soup for a few days, had obviously changed its attitude towards Dean. When it had nothing to do, it would lean on the iron pillar next to Dean. Dean boldly reached out to stroke its hair, but it did not resist. Look at your appearance. You are also an unlucky guy that was caught. Your body has been transformed into this strange appearance. After a few days of observation, Dean had seen the fine carapace tissue under the monster's abdomen. It should be from an aquatic monster or a sea monster. It obviously did not match the monster's body, but it still grew in its abdomen. The three-tailed wolf whimpered, as if it was responding to Dean. Dean sighed. He thought that Burrow knew about cloning and organ transplantation. He must have mastered a lot of technology from the old era. He did not know the reason why it betrayed the Empire. The next morning, the cell was pushed open. Burrow walked in with a tired face. He glanced at Dean and Jason. "You come with me." He helped Dean open the iron lock of the cage. Dean was startled. He did not expect that it would be his turn so soon. He could not help but look at Jason. He thought that Jason would be in front of him. "Are you going to do an experiment?" Dean stood up and asked. Balyo nodded slightly. "What experiment?" "I have entered a relic from the old era. I found a lot of ancient books and learned some things. Maybe they can help you." Dean said. Burrow gave him a look and shook his head. "You wouldn't understand even if I told you. In terms of biological research on the human body, I've long surpassed the olden era. The information in the ruins isn't of much use to me. It really is laughable when I think about it. The olden era humans have developed for so long, their technology in other areas so advanced that it's unimaginable, yet they still haven't made any progress in the field of the human body. Even an organ transplant is a rather difficult experiment, let alone cloning or genetic modification." Dudian was startled. He didn't expect the old man to know so much about the old era. Thinking of the microscope, he suddenly realized that the latter was once a king. Judging from the size of the Shenluo Empire, how many relics were hidden in it? Burrow must have seen a lot of items in the relics. Although his understanding of the old era was not as good as Dean's, but it was not much worse. The environment is different. The focus is naturally different. Dean explained, the environment in the old era was comfortable. Not like now. We have to rely on our fists and feet to fight the monsters. So the natural development is different. Burrow looked at him with interest. That's true, but the true reason is because of us humans, hypocrisy. The pedantic humans in the old era advocated the idea of humanism, not to mention using the human body as experimental material. Even monkeys and orangutans with human genes would be banned from the experiment. How slow is the progress of the experiment under such circumstances? How much time does it take to change different materials and repeatedly adjust the experiment? There is no other way. If it was allowed to kill their compatriots, then they would have self-destructed. Dean frowned. Chapter 965. Maybe this is the difference between us and the monsters. Dean didn't argue with him anymore. Do you want to research the power beyond the king by using the abyss as an experiment? Burrow's mouth curved. You aren't stupid. Come out. Dean stepped out of the cage and followed behind Burrow. Do you want to become an origami? Origami? Buolo did not turn around. He simply smiled and replied, although the origami are powerful, they have already broken away from their very essence. I do not wish to become something that is not even human yet. Otherwise, I would just be an honest king. Something that wasn't even human? Dean was surprised. He thought of the nearly 10 meters tall figure of origami. It seemed that his previous guess was right. Origami wasn't a human. Why do you care if your body is a human or not as long as your mind is still your own? Dean wanted to test his thoughts, so he deliberately said, our current posture should not be regarded as human, right? The mutation in the body is just a small matter. Burrow glanced at him. But there are some things that can affect your thinking. For example, some magic marks can bring strength to the body, but it can also subtly transform the body so that the body likes fresh blood and meat. In the end, they can only eat monsters or humans. Perhaps they can't be called human when they are hungry, but they will return to normal thinking after they fill their stomach. Such changes can only be regarded as weak. Dudian was startled. He knew that although the magic marks couldn't directly affect the brain, but it could change the body. The changes in the body would affect the brain. It was like when the body smelled the fragrance of fresh blood, the brain's resistance to the blood would weaken. Slowly, it would no longer feel disgusting, but would even feel delicious and sweet. So the origami can affect the mind? Is it the same for the king? Dean asked. Of course. The more you get, the more you will lose. As for what you lose, it varies from person to person. Some care about it and some don't. Burrow indifferently said, but if you cherish something but you don't care about it after you become a king, then are you still willing to be a king? Dean's heart was shocked. The first thought that came to his mind was Aisha. If his obsession after becoming a king was no longer to resurrect her, he even felt that she was irrelevant. Then what was the point of all his efforts? He suddenly felt that God was making a fool out of him. He was like an ant on a chessboard, thinking that he had taken the correct step. But little did he know that there was an invisible line under his feet. How many people, in the process of growing up, had long forgotten what they wanted in the first place? Perhaps it was like a fish in a dish. After entering a large river, it could only move in the same direction with the waves of the river. It could not go against the current, nor could it change its course. It could only follow the current. Stop is the abyss, go forward, it's still the abyss. Dean muttered to himself, suddenly confused. Here we are. Burrow's voice brought Dean's thoughts back. After they left the cell, they passed through the spacious living room they saw at first, and then went down another corridor to the next floor. Bolo pushed open the heavy door in front of him, and inside was a bright laboratory. The walls were made of pure white aluminum, and there were many instruments inside, as well as 3 hospital-like beds. Dean glanced around and saw Zaxby's figure lying on one of the beds. But at the moment, his appearance was very strange. In addition to half of his face that could identify his identity, his body was beyond recognition. There was a black thigh, thick tentacle protruding from his abdomen. It was like a very thick tail of a viper, gently swaying. His severed arms were connected to swollen tissues. It looked like 2 fat intestines. The surface was purple and exuded a fishy smell. Dean's heart slowly sank. He looked around the laboratory, but didn't see Aisha's figure. Anger gushed out from the bottom of his heart. He gritted his teeth and said in a low voice, "Where is she?" "Who?" "Aisha. Is it the Corpse King?" Burrow chuckled. "It seems that you care about her. Don't worry, she is very good. I don't lack the Corpse King here, so I don't need to use her for experiments for the time being. Moreover, she is a bit different from the general Corpse King. She should be the descendant of the Witchers, right? This is a rare treasure. After I finish this experiment, it won't be too late to study her. If I can find something novel, maybe—" He licked his lips and didn't continue. He went straight to a tall cross next to the laboratory and waved to Dean. Dean was a little relieved to see that Aisha was fine for the time being. But the latter's words made his heart colder. He knew that anger was useless. He restrained his killing intent and slowly walked over. It was a steel cross with shackles on it. It seemed to be used to fix people. The edges were stained with rusty blood. "Go up," Burrow said. Dean stood up. Burrow smiled. An obedient experimental subject like Dean was very worry-free. Unlike some experimental subjects who knew that struggling was useless but still wanted to struggle. It was a pity that he accidentally damaged them. Although he knew that Dudian was tactful, he still handcuffed Dudian and pushed a cart from the side. There were various tools and drugs on it. He took out a syringe and a tube of liquid medicine and injected it into Dudian. Dean immediately felt his body gradually numb and became unconscious. Anesthetic? Dean opened his mouth. He felt that his speech was a little rough and his tongue was a little numb. Although he knew that he was about to become an experimental subject and even his body would be cut open, he didn't know why there was not much fear in his heart. Perhaps he was mentally prepared when he was arrested. At this moment, he was curious about the anesthetic injected by Burrow. Burrow took off his fur coat and put on a dust-proof white coat. Like a doctor, he took out disinfectant from the cart and sprayed it on a pair of gloves as thin as skin. The air was suddenly filled with the smell of disinfectant. "You are not nervous." Burrow put on the mask and glanced at Dean. He didn't judge by Dean's expression, but by his heartbeat and body functions. "I have done these experiments before, but I never thought that one day I would become an experimental subject." Dean continued with his numb tongue. "What is the difference between the Abyss and the King? It shouldn't be based on the number of ice worms. Do you want to know?" Burrow stripped off Dean's clothes. Dean wasn't wearing the standard armor issued by the God of War's wall. The armor had hindered the transformation of his demonic body, so it had long been discarded. At the moment, he was wearing an animal fur shirt and short sleeves. They were easily torn apart by Burrow. In the blink of an eye, Dean was naked in front of him. Then Burrow took out a silver knife from a cart. It seemed to be made of silver. After disinfecting it, he touched the abdomen of Dean's six-pack and slowly cut open the middle of the abdominal muscles. Dean looked at his body being cut open, but he didn't have too much fear. Perhaps it was related to the lack of pain. He said, "Of course I want to. Anyway, I'm going to die. It's comfortable to solve the confusion in my heart before I die." Burrow gently smiled and took a rag from the side. He sprayed an unknown liquid on it and slowly wiped it on Dean's cut abdomen. Soon the bleeding stopped. Chapter 966. Iceworm King. Dean slightly raised his eyebrows, but then he thought about it. People had different ranks, kings, beasts had territories, and insects naturally had a king. Suddenly, he thought of the spaceship under the ice lake where the Arctic ice dragon lived. There was a strange insect at the core of the unknown substance that stretched out like a tree branch. Could it be the Arctic insect king? If that was the case, wouldn't he have missed the opportunity to obtain it? A chance to become a king was in front of him. What's wrong? Nervous? Burrow felt that Dean's heartbeat had suddenly accelerated. He looked at him with interest, his eyes deep. "Or have you heard of the Iceworm King somewhere? Or have you seen it before?" "It's impossible to say that I'm not nervous." Dean pretended to be very indifferent, but at a glance he could see that he was deliberately pretending. "This is the first time I've heard that there's a king among the iceworms. It's very difficult to subdue the Iceworm King. The strength of the Iceworm King should be stronger than the Abyss, right?" Burrow glanced at Dean and said indifferently, "It's slightly inferior to the Lord of the Abyss, but it's often surrounded by groups of iceworms. It's very difficult to catch it. Many Lords of the Abyss who had reached the bottleneck tried to catch the Iceworm King, but they were careless and became the worm's food. So the road to the king isn't that simple." "Then why not ask the king for help?" Dean was curious. It should be known that the existence of the Lord of the Abyss must be the top of the empire. The empire was controlled by 7 kings, which meant that it was divided into 7 camps. There was no neutral faction that didn't join the king's camp. It meant that they would be the enemy of all the kings. So since there was a king who joined the camp, then it was naturally the best to ask the king for help. Once successful, they would become the new king, and it would also strengthen the faction of the previous king. Ask the king for help? Burrow sneered. If the king knew about the existence of the Iceworm King, why would he share it with others? Is the king not the limit? It can continue to improve? Dean was surprised. Just like the Abyss, the more iceworm kings it absorbs, the stronger it gets? Burrow sneered. Of course not. To us humans, the Abyss Master is already the limit. As for kings, who knows if they can even be considered humans? When they see the extreme Ice Insect King, they will only destroy it. To them, they only need one true king. Dean was startled and found it hard to understand. But aren't there aliens waiting for an opportunity outside the war god's wall? The stronger the empire is, the better. One more king means one more strength, and we can even completely expel the aliens. Why do we need to suppress them? Could it be that they were afraid of seizing power? But can't they think of other methods to control him? Obtaining a king as their servant should be a supreme glory and vanity, right? What does the outsiders have to do with them? Bo Luo sneered. Do you really think the outsiders can harm them? The world is so big. Even if the empire is destroyed, they still exist. If a king wants to escape, there should be no one who can stop him. Unless the origami that has already passed away is resurrected. But that is impossible. The origami have already gone extinct. Forget it. You won't understand even if I tell you this. As he spoke, he lowered his head and continued to dissect Dean's abdomen. He slowly removed a part of the intestines and organs inside. Dean's face turned ugly. First, because of Burrow's words, and second, because he saw his intestines being pulled out and cut. No matter how good his psychological quality was, he felt numb in his scalp and goosebumps all over his body. He was full of horror and fear. He turned his gaze away, no longer looking at his abdomen. In order to get rid of the image that lingered in his mind, he continued to ask, "You said that king tears can no longer be considered humans. What's the reason for this? Could it be that their way of thinking has already been changed?" Almost. Burrow did not even raise his head. He was concentrating on what he was doing. Is there a big gap between the Ice Worm King and the Ice Worm King? Those who can become the king should be the best among the lords of the abyss. How could their thinking be changed? Is there no magic mark that is unaffected? Dean continued to ask. Anyway, he had become a fish on the chopping board. His life and death were unknown. He was not afraid of offending Burrow. Burrow was not angry. After hearing Dean's words, he glanced at him and said, "Who told you that the change of thinking is because of the magic mark?" That is, the Ice Worm King is not only a nutrient, but also an energy source for the evolution of the human body. Baluo said indifferently, "You should know how tenacious the life force of the extreme ice insects is. It surpasses all the creatures on Earth, and the extreme ice insect king has reached the extreme in this aspect. Apart from the high temperature of the sun, almost nothing can destroy it. Lightning, low temperature, crushing, all of them are useless. No matter how small the crushing is, it is still alive. It lives as a fragmented individual. When countless separated individuals get close to it, it will gather and be reborn. I've said it so clearly. Do you know the reason now?" Dean was startled. Suddenly, his face changed. Although Burrow did not say it clearly, he had already thought of the answer. Nothing could destroy it. This meant that the Ice Worm King was not like the Ice Worm King. It could not be absorbed by the human body as a nutrient for evolution. In other words, when the Ice Worm King was absorbed into the body as a nutrient, it was actually providing the Ice Worm King with the ovaries. The Ice Worm King would grow in the human body and even divide and reproduce. No wonder Burrow said that the king might not be called a human. Thinking of this, he suddenly felt a chill in his heart. Could it be that the bodies of the 7 kings in the empire were nurturing the Ice Worm King? Then was it themselves or the Ice Worm King that was controlling their bodies? If this was the only way to become a king, then wasn't a road of no return to self-destruction? While Dean was lost in thought, Burrow had already stitched up Dean's abdomen and helped him to untie the shackles. He carried him to the bed next to the bed and took out the shackles to lock his hands and feet. Then he went to another cabinet and rummaged through it. There were transparent glass bottles soaked with all kinds of strange things. There were eyeballs, strange tongues, beating hearts, huge stomachs, and so on. Chapter 9:67. Is there no way to erase the consciousness in the extreme Ice Worm King's body? In that case, even if its body can survive, it will still be a pile of cells without consciousness. Dean thought for a moment and asked Burrow, completely ignoring the fact that the latter was grafting a piece of strange intestine into his body. Burrow didn't expect Dean to still have the mind to think about this matter. He looked up at Dean and said with appreciation, "It would be great if all the test subjects were as calm as you. It would save me the effort." Dean's gaze fell on the curved intestine in his hand. His face turned ugly as he looked at it. The intestine was black in color, like tan skin, but there was a little golden light on it, as if it was smeared with golden sand. It was obviously not the intestine of a human. Even the organs of a normal monster wouldn't be like that. If I could erase the consciousness of the extreme Ice Worm King, I would have done it long ago. The experiment I did before was to study how to erase the consciousness of the extreme Ice Worm King while retaining the nutrients in its body. But I've tried everything, and none of them worked. The only way to kill it is the high temperature of the sun, but that will burn its body along with it. It's meaningless. Burrow lowered his head again and said while performing the operation on Dean seriously. Dean frowned and said, "Then how do you plan to surpass the king? Are you going to skip the extreme Ice Worm King and replace it with something else?" Burrow looked at him approvingly. "Smart. The only way now is to replace the extreme Ice Worm King with something else." He continued, "The undead you tamed is the body of Demon Hunter. You should know that a long time ago, the first human evolution relied on the flesh and blood of monsters to enter the body and change the genes. Later, people found that the characteristics of the parasitic soul worm were more convenient and had greater potential than the Demon Hunter experiment. It was also easier to popularize, so the evolution method of the parasitic soul worm was implemented. The difference between these two evolution methods is that one directly transforms the body, while the other transforms the body to the parasitic soul worm. The latter is equivalent to installing a second heart in the body, which is the core to store power. Once the core is gone, the power will be gone too. On the other hand, if you want to increase the power, you need to strengthen the core. But the parasitic soul worm is also a life form, so there is a limit. The Lord of the Abyss is the limit of parasitic soul worms. If you want to improve further, you must create another core, and that is the extreme Ice Worm King. So, if you want to become a king with your own will, you have to find something else to replace it. For example, the origami, or the flaming soul worm in the fire dragons. Dean heard his words and gradually understood. Do you want to use the eliminated Witcher's evolution method and combine it with the power of origami to surpass the king? That's right. Burrow smiled. This was the idea he was most proud of. Although many people in the Magic Creature Research Institute had thought about it and even experimented with it, they had never made any progress. However, he had already found an idea. I remember that your daughter, Dana, seems to have two kinds of magic marks in her body. One is the cold crystal soul worm of the Empire, and the other is the flame soul worm of this place. Dean looked at her thoughtfully, but her power doesn't seem to have reached the level of a king. She should be an incomplete experimental product, right? Burrow's smile disappeared when he heard about Dana. He said faintly, "Yes, they can only be considered to have completed 50%. If they can adapt to the origami gene, they should be able to surpass the king and become a new god. They may even be stronger than the origami. So, the experiment you're going to give me now is to inject the flame soul worm to reach their level, and then inject the origami gene?" Dean looked at him, but his face was a bit cold. Baluo said indifferently, "You can say yes, and you can also say no. What do you mean? Do you know why no one in the Empire has double magic marks?" Burrow didn't answer directly, but looked at Dean. Such experiments are carried out every day in the Holy Court of the Empire, but there has been no progress. Soul worms have a strong exclusivity. A body can only have one parasitic soul worm. If you inject a second parasitic soul worm, then one of them will become food and be swallowed. The reason why I can complete the double magic marks experiment in their bodies is mainly due to the flame soul worm. This kind of soul worm is completely opposite to the cold soul worm of the Empire. They're incompatible like water and fire. In theory, they can't coexist in one body. But the wonderful thing is that they hate and reject each other, so they reach a wonderful balance between them. It's like a magnetic force, and the human body is this magnetic field. So, to achieve double magic marks, we must use the flame soul worm. Dean quickly understood and asked, "One ice and one fire. They meld each other and reach a balance. Has the Holy Court of the Empire studied this method?" It wasn't difficult to see from Burrow's words that the Holy Court was the Monster Research Institute. Burrow slightly curled his lips and sneered. Of course they know, but what's the use of knowing? Those guys don't allow the existence of double magic marks. It means that there is a possibility of the birth of a power that surpasses them. Not allowed? Dean was startled, but then understood. Indeed, even if he was in a superior position, he wouldn't allow the existence of something that could endanger himself. Can I become the king with double magic marks? Can I find the Cold Soul Worm King and the Flame Soul Worm King? If this is the case, then the birth of the king should be stronger than them, right? By the way, do you think that if they absorb the Arctic Soul Worm King and the Flame Soul Worm King at the same time, will they be like the Arctic Soul Worm and the Flame Soul Worm, canceling and restricting each other to achieve a kind of balance? Dean's eyes lit up. Burrow was taken aback for a moment. Then he chuckled. You're quite talented in this aspect, but I've thought of this idea a long time ago, and I've even experimented with it. Unfortunately, it's not easy to find the Ice Insect King and the Flame Insect King, not to mention finding two and storing them at the same time. I've experimented twice, and both ended in failure. Either the Ice Insect King devoured the Flame Insect King, or the Flame Insect King devoured the Ice Insect King. Dean looked at him in amazement. Experimented twice? According to the calculation of 2 at a time, didn't it mean that he had used 4 Cold Soul Worm Kings? 1 Cold Soul Worm King was equivalent to a key to the king's door. If it was used to create a king, then it could cultivate 4 kings. It must be known that there were only 7 kings in the entire Shenluo Empire. All of a sudden, Burrow's image soared in Dean's heart. Experimenting with 4 Cold Soul Worm Kings, this was a big deal. While Dean was stunned, Burrow continued to say, although the experiment failed, but the idea should be correct. If we can find 2 Cold Soul Worm King and Flame Soul Worm King with the same strength, maybe we can reach a balance. Then we can become a king with double magic marks. Moreover, they will have independent consciousness and won't be affected and disturbed. But it is too difficult. When he said the last 2 words, he couldn't help but shake his head. There was a trace of sadness in his eyes. Dean reacted and was about to ask, but then he woke up. Indeed, it was too difficult. Just finding 1 Cold Soul Worm King was extremely difficult. It was like a peerless treasure. It all depended on luck, not to mention finding 2. Moreover, the strength of the 2 Cold Soul Worm Kings was exactly the same. This was equivalent to finding 2 people in a sea of people with the same physical qualities in all aspects. It was impossible to achieve in terms of the entire human population. After all, there were tens of millions of people with similar physique. But eyesight, hearing, vision, strength, fighting experience, and other factors that could determine the outcome of a battle were basically impossible to exist. Not to mention that the number of Cold Soul Worm Kings was very small. If they were a little stronger, they might be able to win in the battle for sovereignty. After a while, Dean felt a strange feeling coming from his abdomen. It was like a limp and numb feeling. But he was anesthetized, so he couldn't feel any other parts of his body. But there was a strange feeling coming from his abdomen. He looked down and saw Burrow lying on his abdomen. The light was too dim, so he couldn't see the situation inside the abdomen. He thought for a moment, but didn't mention the feeling. He continued to ask, since you can't become a king with double magic marks, what are you going to do now? According to what you said before, there is no way. Burrow didn't seem to hear anything. He was concentrating on the things in his hands. Dean saw that Burrow didn't answer. He also thought about it. He felt that if he could survive, this might be a problem that he would have to face in the future. After a long time, Burrow's voice came again. Who said that double magic marks can't do it? Did I say that? I didn't say that the only way to become a real king is to have double magic marks. Dean recovered from his thoughts. He found that Burrow had sutured his abdomen. It seemed that the operation was over. He felt that his abdomen was hot. At the same time, the limp and numb feeling turned into an itch. He wanted to scratch it. It was like a piece of small ants were pinching his abdomen. Burrow wiped the sweat from his forehead. He took a towel from the car next to him and wiped his bloody hands. There was a relaxed smile on his face. In the past, I directly implanted the double magic marks. This caused the magnetic field in the body to reach a balance. I couldn't inject any other energy to enhance my physique. A little bit of carelessness, and the result was failure. But then I thought a new idea. What is it? Dean asked subconsciously. First, I implanted the power of origami. Burrow smiled. I used the origami to replace the Worm King as nutrients. In the early years when I was working in the Holy Court, I found that the flesh and blood of the origami had a suppressive effect on the soul worm. In the past, I used to inject the power of the origami first, and then inject the power of the origami. But this would disrupt the balance of the dual magic marks. So now I changed. I will inject the power of the origami first, and then inject the second soul worm. In this way, when the first soul worm is suppressed by the power of the origami, it should join forces with the second soul worm to form a triangular magnetic field. In the future, as long as I continue to enhance the power of the origami in my body, my own strength will become stronger. Dean was startled. He trembled as he asked, "Did you just implant the intestines of an origami into me?" "Smart." Burrow snapped his fingers. Dean was cold and angry. "Do you know that the vitality of the origami is more tenacious? Moreover, it will enter your brain. Although I don't know what will happen after it enters your brain, but it is likely that it will seize your consciousness." Burrow looked at him in surprise. "You know this?" Chapter 968. Dean once again experienced the taste of being slaughtered. He had swallowed a few pieces of origami's flesh to satisfy his hunger, but he had almost lost his life. It was too late for regrets. At this moment, half of the origami's intestines were directly implanted by Burrow. This was simply killing him, although he guessed that the latter might have a way to suppress it. But what if the effect wasn't as good as he imagined? At the moment, he didn't have the strength to stop the flesh from entering his brain. Burrow saw that Dadian didn't speak and didn't expect him to answer honestly. Even if Dadian told him, Burrow wouldn't believe it. What he saw was the truth. He immediately left the bed and went to the side to take out some tools and test tubes. "Interesting. I'm getting more and more interested in your body." Burrow came to Dean and took out a brand new and clean green ring from transparent bag. It looked like a jade bracelet, but its diameter was palm length. He used the scalpel to cut open Dean's neck. The anesthetic effect on his neck was weak. Dean could feel a slight pain and the feeling of Burrow's fingers caressing his neck. He had never experienced this feeling before. It was a wonderful feeling, but it also made him angry and scared. He felt his Adam's apple being pried open and the flesh on his neck being peeled open under Burrow's fingers. Then, the vertebrae at the back of his neck were also moved, and for a moment, he felt like his head and body were separated. What a dexterous hand! This thought emerged in Dean's mind. He had to say that although Burrow looked burly, but he was more careful than a woman. If it was him, he wouldn't dare to guarantee that the experiment would survive after dissecting to such a degree. However, from this skillful technique, one could not help but conclude that he had done such experiments many times in the past. Dean couldn't make a sound after his Adam's apple was stroked. He looked at Burrow's face. He lowered his head and concentrated on his neck. He was busy with the operation. He could even see the pores on Burrow's face and the tiny dust particles inside. If he could enter the demon's body, then he would only need one blow to cut off his head. Dean thought silently in his heart, but his body could not move, and he was unconscious. The anger in his heart slowly calmed down, and the past slowly emerged in his mind. Only when death was right in front of him did he realize how much he longed for life. Burke finally raised his head and picked up the emerald ring from the metal frame. He gently pulled the ring and separated it into two sections. There was a hidden buckle in the broken part. Burke's eyes were dignified as he inserted the ring under the epidermis of Dudian's neck into the passage that he had previously been busy hollowing out. "Ka!" Dean heard the sound and saw Burrow sigh in relief. The next step was the suture surgery. 10 minutes later, Dean felt that his brain and neck were connected again. The feeling of fullness made him feel that lying down was also a kind of happiness. He opened his mouth slightly and asked, "What is this thing?" His voice was hoarse, and his Adam's apple trembled as he spoke. It was as if something was pressing against his Adam's apple. It felt cold and smooth. Burrow wiped the blood off his hands and let out a sigh of relief. He smiled and said, "This is a uranium ring, a natural element. In my many years of experiments, I found that uranium can suppress the origami factor. Although I don't know what method you use to suppress the power of the origami in your body, but just to be safe, I still put a uranium ring on you. This way, the origami factor in your body will not go to your brain. It will only be sealed in your body and slowly assimilated by your body. Then, you can activate it during battle, and it will become your strength." Uranium element. Dean was startled. His mouth slightly twitched as he thought of the emerald color. He didn't doubt Burrow's words. When it came to uranium element, one had to think of nuclear fuel and nuclear weapons. Since the discovery of the uranium nuclear fission phenomenon, uranium element had been listed as an important rare element by major powers. During the 2 years he was the Lord of the Wall, he also tried to find uranium. But there was no uranium ore in the giant wall. He didn't know where the uranium ore came from, but he didn't know where the uranium ore came from, so he couldn't find any. Uranium element can inhibit the origami factor. Is it because of its natural radioactive radiation? Dean's face slightly changed as he thought of the characteristics of uranium. If this was the case, then wouldn't his body be the first to suffer? He saw that Burrow didn't want to elaborate, so he immediately changed the wording. If this thing can inhibit the origami's power, then can it also inhibit my power? In his opinion, implanting uranium crystal into his body was simply an act of courting death. In a long run, his neck would ulcerate. Even radiation would change the body's functions and cause sterilization, tumors, deformities, and other conditions. Don't worry, I naturally have my reasons for doing this. Burrow smiled. When the dual magic marks are implanted into your body, the magnetic field of ice and fire energy will help you offset the radiation of the uranium ring. It's strange that the soul worm is afraid of the origami's power, but the origami is afraid of the uranium radiation. The soul worm has a strong resistance to the uranium radiation. When the dual soul worm is in your body, it will make you immune to the uranium radiation and even immune to most of the radiation in the outside air. Even if you go to the deepest part of the devil's pit and get swept away by the dark nuclear storm, you'll be safe and sound. Dean's pupils shrank. This was the first time he heard the word nuclear from someone else's mouth. After a moment of shock, Dean quickly reacted. Previously, Burrow had already said that he had read a lot of books from the old era, so he had a more detailed understanding of the old era. So it wasn't strange for him to know about nuclear radiation and nuclear weapons. Now, let me take a good look at your body. Burrow slightly licked his lips as his eyes looked back and forth at Dean's body as if he was looking at a fine work of art. Dean felt unnatural under Burrow's gaze. He felt like he was a naked beauty, but he knew that Burrow didn't have any special hobbies. He just wanted to explore the secret of restraining the origami's power. Burrow took a pair of forceps from the side and took a bit of flesh from Dean's abdomen, the frozen right arm and shoulder, and the temple. Then he took them to the other side of the laboratory and looked at the instrument similar to a microscope. Dean looked at his back as he felt the numbness in his abdomen spreading more and more. He knew that it was the factor that was emitted from the intestines of the origami that was eroding his body. He asked, "The size of the origami is huge. Which part of its intestines did you transplant for me?" Burrow didn't respond as he was concentrating on adjusting the microscope. Dean looked around and saw that Zaxit had woken up on the other bed, but he was still pretending to be asleep. Dean shook his head and winked at Zaxit. Dean knew that he wanted to wait for an opportunity to attack. However, Burrow wouldn't give them such an opportunity. Dean sighed in his heart as he looked at the white ceiling. He felt that time was unbearable. Since he had nothing to do, he asked Burrow again, "Did you make all these instruments yourself, or did you bring them over from the ruins?" Burrow didn't hear anything. Dean continued to ask, "You have defected from the Empire. The 7 kings should hate you, right?" Still silence. "Were all your previous experimental subjects clones of your daughter? Do you know where the fire dragons came from? Are there only 7 kings in the Empire? Did any of them die in battle?" Dean had a lot of questions, but Burrow didn't respond to any of them. Dean didn't care. Anyway, he felt comfortable as he could make some noise to disturb Burrow. Chapter 969. How old are you? Dean was stunned when he heard Burrow's words. After a few seconds, he finally realized what he was asking. He was shocked and asked with a face full of doubt. Are you referring to age? How old are you? Burrow asked again as he stared at Dean. Dean was uneasy, but he quickly replied, I can't remember clearly, but should be about 22 years old, right? Ever since he left Sylvia, he really hadn't calculated his age. He didn't know how many years had passed in the wilderness, so he could only roughly feel how much time had passed. 22? Boluo narrowed his eyes. It should be 322, right? Dean's heart shrank and beat fiercely. He was confused. What did you say? Boluo gave him a deep look, got up from the apparatus, and slowly walked over. I didn't expect you to be hiding such a secret. Now that I think about it, 300 years ago just happens to be the time when the catastrophe happened. You should be someone from the old era, right? Old era? What are you talking about? Dean was at a loss. Bolo's lips curled up slightly. Although I don't know how you survived, and you're still just a small lower abyss after living for so long, your body doesn't lie. How interesting. I didn't expect to meet someone from the old era, and you're so weak. If I had known, I wouldn't have been in such a hurry to use your body for experiments. Dean's heart completely sank. He knew that he could no longer hide it. The latter extracted his flesh and blood on the instrument and seemed to identify his physical condition. However, he couldn't understand. His body was completely frozen in the freezer, but his body was still in the state of 20 years old. How could it identify his frozen age? Suddenly, he woke up. Although he was in a frozen sleep state, but time wasn't static. It was like the frozen meat stored in the refrigerator. It could still identify the storage time of the meat. It could be seen that the microscope-like instrument used by Burrow wasn't a simple microscope. 322 years old man from the old era. Burrow came to the bed. There was a bit of excitement in his eyes. He looked up and down at Dean as if he was a rare protected animal in the zoo. Zaxi, who was pretending to be asleep, heard Burrow's words. There was a trace of shock in his eyes as he looked at Dean, who looked like a young man. 322 years old? Old era man? He suddenly felt that his brain was not enough to process all of this. At this moment, his rich life experience seemed a little ignorant and ill-informed. Dean felt uncomfortable under Burrow's stare. He could only remain silent. He knew that he might be dissected from the inside out. He would be completely hollowed out by Burrow. As expected, after observing for a while, Boluo said, "Tell me, how did you manage to survive? You've lived for so long, yet you're so weak. I'm really curious about your life experiences." Dean's mouth twitched. After a moment of silence, he slowly said, "There's an instrument called freezer. I don't know if you have heard of it." Freezer? Burrow's eyes lit up. Is it the ice house where the remains of the origami are stored? Almost. And then, Dean looked at him. Sleeping in the freezer will stop the body's functions. As long as the energy of the freezer continues, then you can sleep. I have been sleeping for 300 years. He didn't intend to hide the matter of the freezer. First, the freezer was useless to him. Second, even if Burrow got it, it wouldn't have much impact on him. It was just an instrument to hide from the world. Sleeping in the freezer for 300 years can bring you back to life? Burrow looked at him strangely. Do you think I'm a 3-year-old child that can be so easily fooled? Dean raised his eyebrows. You don't believe me? At least as far as I know, freezing can keep the body in the same state as when it was alive. But it can only be used to store dead things. Once a living thing is frozen and its heart stops beating, it is equivalent to death. Even if it is thawed, it can't be resurrected. Do you want to use this to test it, and then take the opportunity to escape? Burrow ridiculed. Dean was speechless, but soon he thought that the freezer he was sleeping in was completely different from the general freezer. Burrow obviously understood the freezer as a freezer. He sighed and explained, "It's true. The freezer and the freezer are two different things. although they are both frozen, but the freezer is especially made for living people. When it is thawed, it will stimulate your heartbeat and bring you back to life. I don't know the specifics, but what I said is true. If you don't believe me, then you can find it and study it yourself. Where is it? In a divine wall called Sylvia. Luo sneered and said, in that case, I have to cross the battle god wall first, and then find this god wall before I can get your so-called cryogenic chamber. Dean sighed. Why is the truth more untrustworthy than lies? You don't have to say any more. I have a way to check if what you said is true or false. Burrow waved his hand and left. Dean's face turned ugly. Are you going to torture me? Burrow didn't respond as he pushed the door open and went out. Fuck, Dean cursed. His face was full of anger. As a suspicious person, he naturally knew how difficult it was to gain trust. Just like when they caught Dana, they didn't dare to believe her words if they didn't use all the torture methods. No matter how sincere she was, they didn't dare to believe her words. Only when they pushed her to the extreme, or even drove her crazy, would they feel that her words were credible. However, he became a prisoner in the blink of an eye just like Dana at that time. He had witnessed all the torture that Dana had endured from the body to the soul. He naturally didn't want to see such a thing happen to him. Especially the mental torture. Burrow knew his weakness. It was Aisha. He didn't want to see such a nightmare happen. He felt that he would absolutely go crazy if it really happened. Anger, powerlessness, hatred, violence. He even wanted to destroy everything. But in the end, the weakness from his body made him want to die. Chapter 970. Dean was filled with anger and fear when the door of the laboratory was pushed open and Burrow came back. Behind him came the sound of footsteps. Dean's heart was in his throat. But the next moment, he saw that the footsteps behind Bolo weren't Aisha's but Dana's. However, this Dana was different from the Danas he had seen before. She had a cold temperament and wore a scarlet robe. The girl's cheeks were immature, but her eyes were deep and full of majesty like a queen. Dean was relieved, but then frowned. He didn't say a word as he watched Burrow come closer. Don't try to resist. She will enter your dream and read all your memories. Burrow condescendingly looked at Dean. All lies will be debunked and all secrets will be solved. Let me see how the world was destroyed 300 years ago. Dean was startled. Enter a dream? While he was in a daze, the scarlet-red-robed young woman, Dana, had already taken a step forward with an indifferent expression, and then she stretched out her slender little hand to press onto his forehead, causing him to feel a wave of icy cold and soft feeling. Then Dean saw her arm began to change. Dark liquid oozed out from the pores and spread all over her hand. The originally cute little hand instantly turned into a sharp spider leg with fine hair attached to it. Magic markability? Dean was surprised. Suddenly his forehead hurt. It was like a sharp needle was piercing into his forehead. It was slowly piercing deeper and deeper, as if it was going to pierce through his head. Dean's expression twisted uncontrollably. Then he felt numbness on his forehead. It seemed that something had entered his brain. His clear vision instantly blurred and shook. The girl and Burrow turned into multiple afterimages. Then the world slowly darkened, as if he had suddenly fallen into the abyss. He didn't know how long he had fallen. It seemed like a few minutes or a few hours. Suddenly a ray of light appeared. The light slowly expanded and a crack appeared in his vision. The silver-white light was reflected in his line of sight. It slowly became clear and showed a complete picture. It turned out to be an elliptical metal shell. What a familiar metal shell. Dean's consciousness murmured. Dean suddenly turned to the side and saw a few model buttons and a finger-thick bar-shaped display screen with 3 blood-red numbers. 300. Dean was shocked, as if he was struck by lightning. This familiar number, familiar button, wasn't this the first thing he saw after waking up in the freezer? It was the numbers above that let him know that he had been sleeping for a full 300 years. The next moment, Dean saw an extremely pale little boy sitting up in the freezer. He looked around blankly. After a long time, the little boy plucked up his courage and climbed out of the freezer. When he opened the door, he was greeted by rotten and smelly junk. The junk collapsed from above and poured into the freezer, almost crushing him. The little boy vomited on the spot because of the smell. The thing he vomited was the breakfast he had before entering the freezer. After vomiting, the smell of vomit in the air became even more unpleasant. The little boy clenched his teeth and pushed away the garbage. Like a mouse in a stinky ditch, he climbed out of the garbage. His clean body had long been dirty. Then he saw a low and shabby refugee shed. The little boy stood there in a daze for a very, very long time. Only after a very, very long time did he take a step forward. His incomparably weak body swayed as he slowly walked towards the refugee shelter. His back gradually merged with the barren and dim environment. Dean was completely stunned as he looked at this scene. Wasn't this him? Memories seemed to roll in at this moment like a tidal wave. His gaze followed the little boy's body and slowly moved forward. He saw the torrential rain washing away the dirt on the little boy's body. He also saw the little girl in a purple cheongsam appear in the rainy night like a fairy. Her porcelain-like exquisite face was especially dazzling in the dark night, flashing in the thunder. Then he saw the little girl pick up the little boy who had fallen in the mud. She led him to a dilapidated eaves and handed him a meat sandwich. The rain stopped. The little girl wiped the water off his body and took him to an orphanage. She left the handkerchief to him and floated away. The little boy stood alone in front of the orphanage. Eventually, he slowly walked in and lived in the orphanage. He silently learned the language, silently endured the ridicule, silently observed the world, silently watched the children in the orphanage torture and kill stray cats and dogs, silently listened to his companions talk about the tragic fate of some of the adopted children. Then it was his turn. Between the gardener and the doctor, he chose the woman with the beautiful smile and followed her home. Then he was sent to study. He was caught by hunters to identify his body. He was sent to Scavenger's special training camp. The scenes of the past flashed before his eyes like flickering lights and passing shadows, including the hunting outside the giant wall. Accidentally obtained the first magic mark, the Defiler. There was also the first love that was full of beautiful fantasies. After it was broken, the dark and dim cage, the disappointed eyes, and the desperate crying in the corner, Dean's heart trembled. He had long sealed the beautiful memories of that failure in the deepest part of his memory. He did not want to touch them. Even after he became the Wall Lord, he did not look for her again. But at this moment, all these memories were playing in front of him. When they were in love, the warm eyes, the gentle tone, evoked the softness in the deepest part of his heart. But eventually, it was broken with a final farewell. He looked at the boy who was tortured in the prison. He looked at the boy who was silently planning to escape from the prison. His heart gradually calmed down. The past was the past. His mind also calmed down. There was a faint expectation in his heart. He even hoped that the memory would be omitted as soon as possible. After a long time, Dean finally saw her again. It was the first time they met outside the giant wall. She was wearing a purple cheongsam. She was like a blooming epiphyllum. That familiar voice once again echoed in his ears. He felt a wet and hot liquid slide down to his face. The touch was very real. If I had made the phonograph earlier, it would have been better. Dean thought painfully and regretfully. He had made so many things, but the phonograph and the vintage camera were the only things he had not taken the initiative to make. These two things were not that technologically difficult to make, but as non-military magic items, they did not bring him much profit, so he had ignored them. But how many beautiful things could be preserved in the world with these two things? Sometimes when he looked at the road ahead, he would always ignore the beautiful scenery on both sides of the road. Wasn't this a kind of sad? The memory continued until he once again saw the sad figure in the beast tide. Dean's blood once again trembled and solidified. It seemed that all the blood in his body was cold. He wanted to roar, but his mouth could not make a sound. He was like a bystander who could only witness this scene. He could only look at the desperate figure of the boy holding her, but he could not help anything. He suddenly hated the boy. If he was a little stronger, then all of this would not have happened. As the memory passed, Dean's mood once again changed from grief to numbness. He looked at the scene behind him with a blank expression. The invaders had attacked, became the Wall Lord, left the giant wall of Sylvia, went all the way to the north, met Amelia tried. The last memory stayed in Burroughs' laboratory. The girl reached out her hand and pressed her forehead. The memories from his slumber came to a full stop. His line of sight still stayed on the last memory. It was like the video was stuck in the middle of playing. Dean was silent. In his heart, he slowly guessed what the magic mark ability of this queen like Dana was. He felt that the latter should have seen all of his memories. His secrets were all laid bare in front of her, and he did not hide any trump cards. This was the first time that he was completely exposed in front of the enemy. His heart was completely cold and even a little depressed. But thinking that Burrow did not intend to use Aisha to force him, his heart could not help but rejoice in comfort. He didn't know how much time had passed. Suddenly, the stuck memory quickly reversed. It was like playing in reverse. In the blink of an eye, he once again returned to the scene when he was lying in the freezer. Then the little boy in the freezer closed his eyes. The world was dark. The darkness seemed to last for a few minutes. The little boy opened his eyes again. He saw three faces that made Dean's heart tremble. Father, mother, and sister. This was the last picture he saw when he entered the freezer. The picture was still in the form of fast rewind. Dean's eyes could not keep up with it. Then the image suddenly paused and stopped. The picture stopped was a snow-white ceiling. Then Dean saw a middle-aged man bend down and get close to him. At this moment, it seemed that he had returned to the first person's point of view. The middle-aged man's cheeks were a lot younger, but he recognized at a glance that it was his father. Then he saw his father holding him. His face was full of joy. He also saw his own chubby little hands. Is this the memory of when I was born? Dean thought in his heart. He felt a burst of warmth and nostalgia. He basically didn't remember the things that happened when he was 1 or 2 years old. He even forgot the things that happened when he was 3 or 4 years old. Only a few events left a deep impression on him. But at this moment, with the magic mark ability of Dana, these dusty memories were dug out. So he clearly saw the things that happened after he was born. Perhaps this was an unexpected surprise? Looking at his excited father, he couldn't help but reveal a smile on his face. Chapter 971. Dean looked at his middle-aged father in confusion. His memory at this moment was different from the memory when he woke up 300 years later. He couldn't hear anything. It seemed that his hearing was blocked when he was born. But even so, he had already practiced the ability to read lips over the years. He could understand what his father said through the shape of his lips. However, there was one sentence that made him wonder if he had read it wrong. Were they words with the same sound? But Chinese was particular about pronunciation. Even if they were words with the same sound, there would be subtle changes in the lips. When he was puzzled, his father turned around. His line of sight also changed. He saw a gentle woman in a white gown with a virtuous temperament. It was his mother. At this moment, his mother's face was also full of smiles. She said, "Yes, we finally succeeded." "Great." Dean read her lips and was slightly stunned. Combined with the previous words of his father, he suddenly had some fear in his heart. Soon, he suddenly noticed one thing. His mother was not lying on the delivery bed, but standing in front of him with her clothes intact. Was this not the time when he was born? He was a little confused as he saw his mother take him from his father. She held him in her arms, but she held him low. She could only see his chest and a little bit of his neck. She couldn't see his face, so naturally, she couldn't see if he was talking or what he was saying. After hugging him for a while, his mother gently placed him back where he had been lying and kissed him on the forehead. Looking at her face full of joy, Dean suddenly felt that he should be thinking too much. His mood was good again, and his heart was full of warmth and warmth. At this time, his mother turned her head and said to his father. From his angle, he could just see the upper bodies of the two people and the ceiling above their heads. "I haven't named him yet. What do you think?" Mother said with a smile. His father slowly calmed down from the excitement. He touched his chin and thought for a moment. Then he said, How about Adam? Adam? His mother was stunned for a moment before bursting into laughter. Isn't this name too tacky? Those foreigners always like to copy the Bible in their movies. If that's the case, shouldn't you be called Jehovah? Dean nodded in his heart. Adam? Are you kidding me? How tacky is this? His father laughed and scratched his head. What do you think we should call it then? Dean slightly grinned, thinking that his mother was more reliable. Then he saw his mother's lips move as she said, How about Pangu? Pan-gu. Dean almost fell to the ground. This name is a little too eye-catching. Let's change it. His mother quickly changed her mind. She also felt that the name was a little too arrogant. It seems like a little. Father nodded, thought for a moment, and suddenly turned and walked out of Dean's sight. Dean's mouth slightly twitched. What do you mean by as if? It's either Adam or Pangu. Can't you come up with a more normal name? After a while, his father reappeared in Dean's line of sight. He didn't know where he got a book with a black cover. The cover was protected by a layer of transparent plastic film. The cover of the book was somewhat tattered. Dean saw his father flipping through the book with a dignified expression. After 10 minutes or so, he looked up and said, How about Andy? Dean's mouth slightly trembled. Are you always calling me the wrong way? Andy. His mother was surprised. It seems to be a foreign name. What does it mean? In Aslan language, Andy is a fallen god, although it is the name of a great devil. But the original meaning is divinity. Father closed the book and slowly said, I hope that our child will have divinity in the future and benefit mankind. Mother shook her head slightly. No, this is the name of a fallen god. How can we use it on our child? I remember that Aslan language is similar to English. In English, God means dog. Andy is spelled in reverse. What does it mean? Spelled in reverse. Father was surprised. He opened the book again. After a moment, he seemed to be relieved. He laughed. Then we will call him Dean. It means light in Aslan language. Light? Mother thought for a moment and then nodded. Yes, I hope that our child will act in an open and upright manner. He will never be tarnished. He will be like the sun that shines on everything. Good. Father made a decision. Then we will call him Dean. The two discussed and decided on the name. Dean, who was reading lips, stared blankly and couldn't speak. He didn't expect that his name would contain such meaning and expectation. Open and upright, shine on everything. There was a trace of bitterness in his mouth. He thought that it would be better to call him Andy. At least he conformed to the meaning of the word fallen. Was divinity really light? After his parents finished discussing the names, they left together. After they left, Dean saw a transparent cover slowly fall and cover him inside. Time flew by. Every day after that, his father and mother would come to see him. They would kiss him and sometimes hug him. The strong fatherly love and motherly love made Dean burst into tears. He was touched, sad and sad at the same time. He thought of his father's expectations and mother's advice when the warehouse was closed. They hoped that he could survive, and if he had the ability, he would continue the human race and be a hero of mankind. He had gradually forgotten about this when he was a hunter. Time would always make people unconsciously forget some precious things. But this time, he clearly remembered it once again when he recalled it. But the sea of bitterness is boundless. There is no shore to turn back. After about half a year, when his parents came to visit him again, he felt that he could hear a weak voice. It was as if his hearing had just developed. This made Dean happy. He once again heard the familiar voice of his father and mother. It was like a warm spring that flowed through his heart. He suddenly felt that it was a good thing to be interrogated by Dina. My body seems to be very weak. I have to stay in here every day. I can't even walk down the road. Dean looked at his parents leaving again. There was some regret in his heart. From the communication between his parents when they came to visit him, he also learned that his body couldn't leave this breeding room. Sometimes he could feel that his young body was extremely weak and it was difficult to turn over. Chapter 972. In the breeding room, young Dean spent most of his time in hibernation. Sometimes when his parents came to visit him, he was woken up by the noise. He opened his eyes and went back to sleep. It seemed that he would never be able to sleep. Until one day, Dean heard a gentle knocking sound coming from outside the transparent glass of the breeding room. He opened his eyes and saw a little girl with delicate features. Judging from her eyes and lips, it was his sister. There was a long-lost sense of familiarity in Dean's heart, but soon his eyes closed. The young Dean just glanced at it and went back to sleep. Dean smiled bitterly in his heart. Day after day of intermittent hibernation, time flew by. Dean could feel that young Dean's body was getting stronger and stronger. He was able to get up and sit in the breeding room by himself. Until one day, his parents came to open the breeding room. They picked up young Dean and taught him to walk. After a few falls, the young Dean barely learned to walk. Although he was staggering, his parents were already very excited. His mother said, "Dean can finally walk." "Great. I thought it would take a few more years." After all, he is already 3 years old. Although his development is poor, it is not too late. His father hugged his mother and comforted her. Dean silently remembered in his heart. 3 years old. So, he had been in the breeding room for 3 years. At this time, his parents took young Dean out of the laboratory. When they walked to the door, Dean suddenly wanted to look back and see what the breeding room he lived in for 3 years looked like. Unfortunately, the young Dean went straight out and didn't look back. The pictures he saw were just memories of his childhood, and he could not control them. After leaving the laboratory, Dean quickly saw his sister. The little girl who was like a jade carving before was now 6 or 7 years old. She was dressed like a pink princess and looked very cute. Dean's eyes were gentle. He wanted to reach out and pinch her. Only then did he realize that the proud and aloof sister was so cute when she was a child. "This is your sister, Dushawa. This is your brother, Dean." His mother introduced them to each other. Dean looked at this warm scene and suddenly felt that it was good to stop time. But soon he thought of Aisha and remembered that he was in the underground base of Burrow. His mood suddenly became gloomy. Time slipped away. In the blink of an eye, little Dudian grew up to 7 years old. In the past 4 years, he had been sent to an aristocratic kindergarten to study, and his performance was outstanding. Although his physical fitness was still very poor, he had already displayed the intelligence of a genius. The teacher taught simple math problems that other children could not understand at all, but he only needed to listen to it once to understand it. He had only been in kindergarten for 2 years. When he was 5, he was sent to a place called the elite youth class. There were only half-grown children there, and the oldest was only 7 or 8 years old. However, the knowledge taught there was already at the level of a 3rd or 4th grade primary school student. Little Dudian kept up with his studies, and his grades were getting better and better. Other than going to school every day, he would follow his sister to play video games, play hide-and-seek in a laboratory, or sneak out of the laboratory to secretly watch his father and other researchers do experiments. The cold laboratory was his home. Moreover, he did not feel that this place was deserted. Everything was so beautiful and warm. Until one day, his father told them that the laboratory was going to move. Then they migrated back to their motherland from abroad. After they migrated back, Dudian and his sister's studies were naturally interrupted. His father and mother did not sign them up for a new school. The two siblings had nothing to do at home every day. They played video games. Later, little Dudian found that his sister became dull and played less and less with him. Until one day, little Dudian, who was playing games on the TV, suddenly saw his sister rushing over. Her face was full of panic that he had never seen before. She grabbed the remote control in his hand, took out the game card, and jumped to the normal channel of the TV, a sports channel. However, this sports channel did not even broadcast the evening news, but at this moment in the afternoon, it was changed to the news broadcast. A video was playing on it. It was like a video clip from a science fiction movie. A strange spaceship fell from the sky, broke through the clouds, fell to the ground, and appeared in various countries around the world. The beginning of the catastrophe. Looking at the picture on the TV, Dudian's heart suddenly trembled and tightened. When he was sent to the freezer, he knew that this was the beginning of the disaster. At that time, Dudian, who was more than 7 years old, was also scared by the video on the TV. At a glance, he could tell that it was not a movie special effect, but the real world. If it was another child, it was estimated that they would mistakenly think that it was a special effect. They would be fascinated by this majestic picture and feel excited. But at that time, Dadian was confused, and then he saw fear on his sister's face. Fear was like a virus. It would spread and contagious. Since that day, Dadian had never seen his sister smile again. The smile seemed to be taken away from the faces of his father and mother. There seemed to be an invisible cloud shrouding the family. At the age of 7, Dadian also transformed like an insect in this oppressive atmosphere and quickly matured. Every day, they would stay in front of the TV to watch the breaking news from all over the world. At that time, all the channels seemed to be occupied by the news. There was no TV series, no movies, no cartoons, no entertainment programs. As soon as they turned on the TV, they saw the disaster scenes from all over the world, the construction of majestic shelters, and the meeting and discussion of the leaders of various countries. Dadian was also silently watching the news broadcast, although he had seen it when he was young, but after all, he was only 7 years old. Even if he saw it, he couldn't understand many things. He only remembered the disaster scenes and some shocking shelter blueprints. At the moment, when he was recalling the news, Dadian saw the content of the discussion of the leaders of various countries from the news content recorded in his memory. Biological weapons, thermal weapons, missiles, all the means of human attack were used on the invading monsters. These monsters were all human beings with distorted bodies. They had been unrecognizable, but they were not undead, but extremely strange creatures. Although the missiles could destroy these infected, strange humans, but often killed a lot of people, and more people would be infected. There seemed to be invisible dandelions floating in the sky, floating into more people's bodies. As more and more monsters were infected, the line of defense of various countries shrank again and again. But even so, in just half a year, the face of the earth had completely changed. In the end, the leaders of various countries proposed the ultimate plan: nuclear destruction. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.